My husband's brother lied I seduced him and was carrying his baby. My husband didn't even blink. He spat on me, his mom cursed me, and his sisters dragged me through the streets. I disappeared without a word. 2 years later he found me, and saw the child. His face went pale. He whispered, "Is that?" I shut the door. The pregnancy test trembled in my hands as 2 pink lines materialized like a promise of everything I'd ever wanted. After 18 months of trying, Kevin and I were finally going to be parents. I pressed the plastic stick against my chest, tears streaming down my face as I imagined his reaction. Maybe this would bridge the emotional distance that had grown between us since our wedding. Maybe a baby would make him look at me the way he used to. I tucked the test into my purse, planning to surprise him with dinner and the news tonight. But first, groceries. I needed to pick up ingredients for his favorite meal, lasagna with extra cheese, the way his mother Brittany used to make it. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was constantly trying to compete with a woman who'd never accepted me into their tight-knit circle. Kevin had always been reserved, even during our courtship. His family meant everything to him. Sometimes I wondered if there was room for anyone else in that sacred space. His mother Brittany ruled the household with an iron fist wrapped in Sunday dinners and passive-aggressive comments about my cooking. His sisters, Nora and Audrey, followed her lead like devoted disciples, always finding subtle ways to remind me I was an outsider looking in. But it was Nick, Kevin's younger brother, who made my skin crawl. At 26, he still lived in his childhood bedroom, bouncing between odd jobs and recreational substances that left his eyes bloodshot and his judgment impaired. There was something predatory in the way he watched me during family gatherings, his gaze lingering too long when Kevin wasn't looking. 3 months ago, Nick had cornered me in the kitchen during Brittany's birthday celebration. The smell of alcohol clung to him as he leaned against the counter, blocking my escape route. "Your sister's pretty," he'd said, his words slightly slurred. "Real pretty. Think she'd be interested in settling down?" My younger sister Emma was only 22, fresh out of college and full of dreams that didn't include a deadbeat brother-in-law with substance issues. "She's focused on her career right now," I'd replied diplomatically, trying to sidestep around him. His hand shot out, gripping my wrist. "Come on, Heather. Put in a good word for me. Family should help family, right?" "I don't think you two would be compatible," I said firmly, pulling my arm free. The mark his fingers left faded quickly, but the memory lingered. Nick's expression darkened. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Coming in here with your college degree and your fancy job, acting like you're doing Kevin some kind of favor by marrying him. That's not. You'll regret this," he whispered, his voice dropping to something cold and threatening. "You'll regret looking down on me." I dismissed his words as the ramblings of someone whose brain had been fried by too many late nights and chemical enhancements. Kevin loved me. We were building a life together. Nick was just jealous, bitter about his own failures. How naive I'd been. The grocery store felt different that afternoon, every aisle gleaming with possibility. I found myself gravitating toward the baby section, running my fingers over tiny onesies and imagining Kevin's strong hands cradling our child. I picked up prenatal vitamins, my first official act as an expectant mother, and smiled at the elderly cashier who reminded me to take care of myself. The drive home was magical. I rehearsed different ways to break the news, settling on placing the test next to his dinner plate with a note. "Our family is growing." Simple. Perfect. Life-changing. But when I pulled into our driveway, something felt wrong. Too many cars lined the street. Kevin's truck sat crooked in the driveway as if he'd parked in a hurry. Through our front window I could see silhouettes moving around our living room, shapes that belonged to his entire family. My hands shook as I fumbled with the grocery bags, the pregnancy test burning like evidence in my purse. Maybe they were planning a surprise for someone's birthday. Maybe Brittany had decided to cook dinner here instead of her house. The front door swung open before I could reach for my keys. Kevin stood there, his face a mask of fury I'd never seen before. Behind him I could see Brittany, Nora and Audrey arranged like a tribunal in our living room. Nick sprawled on our couch, his expression smug and satisfied. "We need to talk," Kevin said, his voice flat and emotionless. I followed him inside, grocery bags still clutched in my numb fingers. The atmosphere was suffocating, charged with an electricity that made my skin prickle with warning. "Sit down," Brittany commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I remained standing, clutching the bags like a shield. What's going on? Kevin held up a piece of paper, official looking with medical letterhead and scientific terminology scattered across its surface. My eyes struggled to focus on the words, but certain phrases jumped out. DNA paternity test, conclusive results, biological father. Care to explain this? Kevin's voice cracked like a whip. I stared at the document, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. I don't understand. What is this? It's a DNA test, Nick said from the couch, his voice dripping with false concern. Kevin found it in your things. Apparently you've been keeping some pretty big secrets. The grocery bags slipped from my hands, cans rolling across our hardwood floor. That's impossible. I've never taken any DNA test. I don't know what this is. It says the baby you're carrying is Nick's, Audrey said, her voice sharp with accusation. It says you've been sleeping with your brother-in-law. The room tilted sideways. What baby? How did you? We found the pregnancy test in your purse, Nora said triumphantly. While you were out playing innocent at the grocery store. They'd gone through my personal belongings. They'd found my secret before I could share it with my own husband. But worse, somehow there was a document claiming Nick was the father of a child I'd only discovered hours ago. This is insane, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Kevin, you know me. You know I would never. His face contorted with disgust. I thought I knew you. Apparently I was wrong. Before I could react, before I could defend myself or demand an explanation, Kevin's saliva hit my face. The shock of it, the complete violation, left me frozen. My husband, the man who'd promised to love and protect me, had just spat on me like I was something disgusting he'd scraped off his shoe. You're revolting, he said, his voice filled with hatred I'd never imagined possible. Brittany's hand connected with my cheek before I could process what was happening. The slap echoed through our living room, followed immediately by Audrey's fingers tangling in my hair, yanking me toward the front door. Everyone needs to see what kind of woman you really are, Audrey snarled, dragging me outside. I screamed Kevin's name, begged him to listen, to think, to remember who I was. But he stood in our doorway watching as his sisters humiliated me in front of our neighbors, his face empty of any love that had ever existed between us. The lie had already taken root, growing like poison through everything I'd believed was real. The streetlights blurred through my tears as I stumbled away from what used to be my home. My face still stung from Brittany's slap, my scalp throbbed where Audrey had yanked my hair, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollowness spreading through my chest. Behind me, I could hear car doors slamming, engines starting, the family retreating back to their fortress of self-righteousness. I didn't look back. Not once. My Honda Civic sat in the driveway like a faithful friend, the only thing in this nightmare that hadn't betrayed me. I slid behind the wheel, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. Where could I go? My parents had died in a car accident when I was 19. A fact that had drawn Kevin to me initially, his protective instincts activated by my orphan status. Now that protection felt like a cruel joke. Aunt Peyton lived 3 hours north, but she was 72 and battling her own health issues. The last thing she needed was her pregnant niece showing up on her doorstep with a scandal that would probably give her a heart attack. I couldn't do that to her. I couldn't burden the only family I had left with the wreckage of my life. I drove aimlessly through the suburbs, past houses glowing with warm light, families gathered around dinner tables, children safe in their parents' love. Everything I'd thought I had. Everything I'd lost in the span of 30 minutes. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat. Kevin's name flashed across the screen, then disappeared when I didn't answer. It buzzed again. And again. I finally grabbed it and powered it off completely, the sudden silence more terrifying than the incessant ringing. Claire. The name hit me like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. We'd been roommates in college, sisters by choice if not by blood. She'd moved to Portland 2 years ago for work, but we'd stayed close. If anyone would understand, if anyone would help without judgment, it would be Claire. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and used the payphone, an ancient relic that suddenly felt like salvation. My fingers trembled as I dialed her number from memory. Hello. Her voice sounded sleepy, confused. Claire, it's me. Heather. I'm sorry to call so late, but My voice cracked, the words catching in my throat like broken glass. Heather. What's wrong? You sound terrible. The concern in her voice, The immediate shift from confusion to protective mode broke something loose inside me. I sobbed into the grimy payphone receiver, gasping out fragments of the story between tears. The fake DNA test. Kevin's spit. The humiliation. The pregnancy that should have been a blessing but had become my destruction. "Get in your car right now," Claire said, her voice steel-wrapped in velvet. "Drive to Portland. Don't stop, don't think, just drive. I'll have coffee ready and a bed made up. We'll figure this out together." The 6-hour drive passed in a blur of highway lights and rest stops. I survived on gas station coffee and determination, my belly cramping occasionally, reminders of the tiny life growing inside me, innocent of the chaos surrounding its conception. Every mile that stretched between me and Kevin felt like another stitch in the wound, painful but necessary for healing. Claire met me at her apartment door wearing pajamas and a fierce expression that dared the world to hurt me further. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. "We don't have to talk about it tonight," she whispered into my hair. "But tomorrow we're going to destroy whoever did this to you." Her guest room became my sanctuary. Claire worked as a graphic designer, mostly freelance, which meant flexible hours and the ability to check on me throughout the day. She bought prenatal vitamins without being asked, stocked the refrigerator with foods that wouldn't trigger my morning sickness, and never once questioned my version of events. "You could fight this," she said one evening as we sat on her couch, sharing a pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream. "Expose the fake DNA test. Make them pay for what they did." I pressed my hand against my growing belly, feeling the first flutter of movement that would later become kicks and hiccups and tiny feet pressing against my ribs. What if I can't prove it was fake? What if they've already convinced everyone? What if fighting just makes it worse? Claire studied my face in the lamplight. "What do you want to do?" "Disappear," I said without hesitation. "Completely. Let them live with their lie while I build something real." She nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll do." The transformation began the next week. I applied for remote work positions, leveraging my marketing background to secure a position with a company that didn't care where I lived as long as I delivered results. Claire helped me set up a home office in her spare room, creating a workspace that felt professional and permanent. Months passed in a cocoon of quiet productivity. My belly grew round and firm, my body changing in ways that amazed and terrified me. I attended doctor's appointments alone, declined to learn the baby's gender, and carefully avoided any mention of the father on medical forms. This child would be mine alone. The November rain drummed against the hospital windows as labor pains gripped my body with increasing intensity. Claire held my hand through every contraction, coached me through every breath, and cried with me when Henry finally made his entrance into the world. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair that reminded me painfully of Kevin. His eyes, when they finally opened, were the same deep brown as his father's. My heart clenched with recognition and loss. "He looks like you," Claire lied kindly, but we both knew the truth. Henry looked exactly like Kevin. Every feature, every expression, every tiny mannerism as he grew would be a reminder of the man who'd chosen his family's lies over his wife's truth. But he was also mine, completely, utterly, unconditionally mine. The nights were the hardest. When Henry cried and I walked the floors of Claire's apartment, I sometimes imagined calling Kevin. Imagined his voice soft with wonder as I described our son's first smile, his tiny fist wrapped around my finger, the way he calmed instantly when I sang lullabies. But then I'd remember. The spit. The hatred in his eyes. The sisters who dragged me through the streets like I was trash to be discarded. The family that had chosen Nick's convenient lie over 2 years of marriage and love. I changed my phone number and blocked every possible way they could contact me. Social media accounts disappeared. Old email addresses were abandoned. Heather Morrison, Kevin's wife, ceased to exist. In her place, I became Heather Collins, single mother, survivor, woman who'd learned that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply refusing to be destroyed. Henry and I built our quiet life in Portland, far from the poison of lies and false accusations. My absence became my statement. My silence became my strength. They'd wanted me gone. I gave them exactly what they wanted, and somehow that felt like winning. 2 years of peace shattered with a single phone call on a Tuesday morning. Henry was building towers with colorful blocks in our living room, his chubby fingers carefully stacking each piece while making soft vroom sounds. At 24 months he was becoming a little person with opinions and preferences, his father's stubborn streak already emerging when bedtime approached. Claire's voice carried an edge I hadn't heard since that first night I'd arrived on her doorstep. "Heather, we need to talk. Someone's been asking about you." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. In 2 years no one had come looking. I'd become a ghost, existing in the spaces between my old life and this new reality I'd carefully constructed. "Who?" The word came out sharper than intended. "Kevin. He contacted Sarah from our old college group. Asked if she'd heard from you, if she knew where you were." Sarah called me because she didn't know what to say. The living room seemed to tilt slightly. Henry looked up from his blocks, sensing the shift in energy with that uncanny ability children possess. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, studied my face with concern. "What did you tell Sarah?" "Nothing." "But Heather," he sounded desperate. "Sarah said he was crying on the phone." I set down my coffee with hands that had begun to shake. "I don't care if he was screaming. He made his choice 2 years ago." But Claire's silence stretched too long and I knew there was more. "What aren't you telling me?" "Sarah mentioned something else. Kevin's brother, Nick, he's been in the hospital. Something about pneumonia that turned serious. She heard it through the grapevine." The mention of Nick's name still made my stomach clench, but I felt no sympathy for his illness. Good. Maybe karma finally caught up with him. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that in a sterile hospital room 3 states away, Nick was drowning in more than just fluid in his lungs. The infection had triggered a high fever that broke down the walls he'd built around his conscience. And in his delirium, the truth began pouring out like poison from an infected wound. Kevin had been maintaining a vigil at Nick's bedside, their mother rotating shifts with their sisters. The family that had rallied so quickly to destroy me now gathered to save the one who'd orchestrated it all. But guilt, it turned out, was a more persistent infection than pneumonia. "I did it," Nick had whispered through the oxygen mask, his voice barely audible above the machines monitoring his failing body. "I made it all up." Kevin initially thought it was fever talk, meaningless rambling from a brain struggling with infection and medication. But Nick kept repeating it, becoming more agitated when no one seemed to understand. "The DNA test. I faked it. Heather never. She never did anything. I wanted to hurt her because she wouldn't help me with her sister. I wanted to destroy her." The confession came in fragments over several delirious hours, each piece falling into place like a jigsaw puzzle revealing a picture too horrible to comprehend. Nick described how he'd found the pregnancy test in my purse when I'd left it unattended during a family dinner. How he'd researched online laboratories and created a convincing fake document using medical terminology and official-looking letterheads. How he'd planted it where Kevin would find it while I was out buying groceries for the surprise dinner that never happened. Kevin's world imploded in that hospital room. The brother he'd defended, the family member whose word he'd taken over his wife's, had systematically destroyed the only good thing in Kevin's life. And he'd helped. He'd been the weapon Nick used to tear apart my world. The attack happened right there in the ICU. Kevin's hands found Nick's throat before rational thought could intervene, alarms screaming as medical staff rushed to separate them. Security was called. Kevin was banned from the hospital for 24 hours while Nick's condition stabilized. But the damage to their family had just begun. Kevin stormed into his mother's house like a hurricane, demanding answers, screaming questions that had no good responses. Had they known? Had they suspected? How could they have been so quick to believe Nick's lies? Brittany's breakdown was spectacular and ugly. She'd orchestrated my public humiliation, led the charge to drag me through the streets like a scarlet woman. The realization that she'd destroyed an innocent woman, her own daughter-in-law, sent her into hysterics that required medical intervention. Nora and Audrey faced their own reckonings. The sisters who'd been so eager to play judge and jury found themselves confronting the reality that they'd participated in ruining the life of someone who'd done nothing wrong. The guilt consumed them in different ways. Nora developing panic attacks that left her unable to sleep. Audrey throwing herself into volunteer work at women's shelters as if she could somehow balance the scales of karma. Kevin's search for me began that same week. He started with the obvious places. Hospitals where I might have given birth, apartment complexes near where we'd lived, old coworkers who might have stayed in touch. He hired a private investigator who came up empty-handed. I'd vanished more completely than any of them had imagined possible. Desperation drove him to create fake social media profiles, joining groups for new mothers, scanning photos for a glimpse of my face. He contacted every mutual friend we'd ever had, leaving voicemails that grew more frantic with each passing day. If you hear from Heather, please tell her I know the truth now. Please tell her I'm sorry. Please tell her I'll do anything to make this right. But I'd severed those connections so thoroughly that his messages fell into voids. The private investigator's report was devastating in its completeness. No credit cards, no lease agreements, no employment records, no digital footprints. Heather Morrison had effectively ceased to exist. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Claire had been watching my emotional deterioration as Kevin's search intensified. The stress was affecting my work, my sleep, my ability to be fully present for Henry. She made a decision that would change everything, motivated by love and concern for my well-being. When Kevin's investigator contacted her directly, she broke. Not completely, she didn't reveal my location or current identity. But she confirmed that I was alive, that I was safe, and that I had indeed been pregnant when I disappeared. She had the baby, Claire told the investigator, her voice heavy with the weight of betrayal she was committing against my trust. And you need to know, the child looks exactly like Kevin. Nothing like Nick. Nothing at all. That single thread was all Kevin needed. He followed it back to Claire, staking out her apartment building, tracking her movements, waiting for the moment when desperation would overcome my careful security measures. The hunt had begun and my 2 years of peace were about to end. The knock came at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening, just as Henry and I were finishing our ritual of watering the small herb garden we'd planted together in Claire's backyard. The sound echoed through the apartment with a finality that made my blood freeze. Not the casual tap-tap of a neighbor or the rhythmic pattern of a delivery driver. This was deliberate, measured, weighted with intention. Henry looked up from the tiny watering can he'd been using to drench the basil plants, his little face bright with the simple joy of helping. "Door, Mama." I knew. Without looking through the peephole, without checking the security monitor Claire had installed after my arrival, I knew exactly who stood on the other side of that wooden barrier. My body recognized the sound the way trauma survivors recognize their triggers. Instantly, viscerally, completely. My hands shook as I approached the door, Henry trailing behind me with his watering can still clutched in his fists. Through the peephole, Kevin's face appeared distorted by the fisheye lens, but unmistakably him. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 2 years. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes sunken into dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights and endless guilt. The strong jawline I'd once loved to trace with my fingertips now looked sharp enough to cut glass. I opened the door just wide enough to see him clearly, keeping the chain lock engaged. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hallway, but nothing could hide the devastation written across his features. "Heather." My name fell from his lips like a prayer, broken and desperate. Behind me, Henry had gone silent in that way children do when they sense adult tension. I could feel his presence at my hip, his small body warm against my leg as he peered around me with curious eyes. Kevin's gaze dropped to Henry and I watched his face transform. The recognition was immediate and devastating. Henry's dark hair caught the hallway light the same way Kevin's did. The shape of his nose, the set of his shoulders, even at 2 years old, it was like looking at Kevin as a toddler. "Is that?" Kevin's voice cracked, the question hanging in the air between us like smoke. I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped back and closed the door with a soft click that seemed to echo through the entire building. But Kevin didn't leave. I could see his shadow beneath the door, could hear him breathing on the other side of the wood. For 20 minutes, he stood there in absolute silence while Henry and I finished dinner, while I gave Henry his bath, while I read him his bedtime story. Only when the hallway lights switched to their dimmer evening setting did I hear his footsteps finally retreating. He returned the next evening. And the evening after that. On the 4th day I found a letter slipped under the door. My name was written across the envelope in Kevin's careful handwriting, the same script that had once adorned love notes hidden in my lunch bag. I threw it away without opening it. More letters followed. Gift boxes appeared outside the door, children's toys that remained unopened, flowers that wilted in their wrapping paper, photos of our wedding day that made my chest ache with phantom pain. I donated the toys to charity and threw everything else in the dumpster behind Claire's building. The apologies came through the door itself, Kevin's voice muffled but audible as he spoke to the wood as if it were my face. I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. Please, Heather. Just let me explain. Henry began asking questions. Why sad man talk door, mama? I told him the man was confused that he had the wrong apartment. But children see truth in ways adults can't, and Henry's eyes held knowledge beyond his years when he looked at that door. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night when I'd worked late on a particularly demanding project. Claire was out of town visiting her parents and the apartment felt too quiet, too vulnerable. I'd just gotten Henry settled in his crib when I heard movement in the hallway. Kevin wasn't knocking this time. He was sitting against my door, his back pressed to the wood, and he was crying. Not the careful, controlled tears of a man trying to maintain dignity, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone whose world had completely collapsed. I believed them, he whispered to the door, his voice barely audible through the wood. God help me, I believed them because it was easier than admitting I might be wrong. It was easier than standing up to my family. It was easier than choosing you over them. I pressed my own back against the door, separated from him by 3 inches of wood and 2 years of devastation. I threw away everything good in my life because I was a coward. Because I let them convince me that their version of events made more sense than trusting the woman I married. The woman I promised to protect. His voice broke completely then, and I could hear him struggling to breathe through his tears. I see your face every night when I close my eyes. I see the way you looked at me when I spit on you. I see the confusion, the betrayal, the way your whole world fell apart in that moment. And I know I did that. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too weak to fight for you. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my knees drawn up to my chest, listening to the man I'd once loved pour his heart out to a piece of wood. That little boy in there, he's mine, isn't he? He has my eyes. My mother's chin. The way he holds his head when he's curious, I used to do that as a child. He's my son, and I'll never get to know him because I chose to believe a lie instead of trusting my wife. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady and cold. You're right. You'll never know him. Because I'm not the same woman who loved you, Kevin. That woman died the night you chose your family's lies over 2 years of marriage. And Henry isn't your son to claim just because you feel guilty now. The silence that followed stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, I heard him stand, heard his hand touch the door one last time. I know, he whispered. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know, I never stopped loving you. Even when I thought you'd betrayed me, part of me knew it didn't make sense. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that I didn't listen to that part. His footsteps faded down the hallway, but this time I knew he'd be back. The door between us had become a symbol of protection, of boundaries, of the life I'd built without him. And I had no intention of opening it. Kevin's individual visits had prepared me for his persistence, but I wasn't ready for the delegation that arrived 3 weeks later. Through the peephole, I watched them gather in the hallway like mourners at a wake. Brittany clutching a manila envelope to her chest, Nora fidgeting with rosary beads, Audrey holding what appeared to be a professionally wrapped gift box. The knock came in a pattern I didn't recognize, hesitant and apologetic. When I didn't respond, I heard Brittany's voice, thinner than I remembered, aged by guilt and sleepless nights. Heather, please. We know you're in there. You just want to talk. We need to make this right. Henry was napping in his room, and I was grateful for the silence that meant he wouldn't witness this moment. I stood frozen behind the door, watching through the peephole as Kevin's family, the people who had orchestrated my public destruction, waited for forgiveness I had no intention of granting. We brought letters, Nora added, her voice barely above a whisper. Explanations. We know what we did was unforgivable, but please. I walked away from the door without responding. Let them stand there. Let them feel the weight of closed doors and silence. Let them understand what it felt like to be shut out, unwanted, dismissed. They waited for an hour before finally leaving their offerings and departing. When Claire returned from her business trip that evening, she found me sitting on the couch, surrounded by unopened envelopes and gift boxes, staring at them like they might explode. They came here, I said simply. Claire's expression hardened. She'd been fielding increasingly desperate calls from Kevin's family members, each one begging for her intervention, her help in reaching me. She'd become my inadvertent gatekeeper, a role that was wearing on her patience. What do you want me to do with these? She asked, gesturing at the pile of attempted reconciliation. Send them back. But first, I want you to deliver a message. Claire waited, her notebook already in hand. Tell them, you shamed me in public. You will heal in silence. The message was delivered, but it didn't stop them. Brittany's letters began arriving daily, each one more desperate than the last. They were handwritten on her personal stationery, the same elegant script she'd used to address our wedding invitations. The irony wasn't lost on me. I never opened them, but Claire did, reporting back on their contents with a mixture of fascination and disgust. She's taking full responsibility, Claire told me one evening. Says she let her protective instincts for Kevin override her judgment. That she should have questioned Nick's story more carefully. And she wants to know about her grandchild. Asks if Henry has any medical issues she should know about, if he needs anything, if you're financially stable. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Now she wants to be a grandmother. After calling me a whore in front of the entire neighborhood. Nora's approach was different. She'd apparently entered therapy specifically to address her role in my public humiliation, and her therapist had suggested she attempt to make amends as part of her healing process. She began showing up at places I frequented. The grocery store, the pediatrician's office, the park where Henry played. She never approached directly, but she was always there, hovering at the edges of my life like a guilty ghost. Claire finally confronted her in the cereal aisle of our local supermarket. Stop stalking my friend, Claire had said, loud enough for other shoppers to hear. Your guilt is not her responsibility to fix. Nora's face had crumpled, but she'd nodded and left the store immediately. Audrey chose the most public route for her contrition. Her social media apology was shared thousands of times. A carefully crafted essay about the dangers of jumping to conclusions, the importance of supporting women in crisis, and the lasting damage caused by public shaming. She tagged domestic violence organizations and women's shelters, turning her guilt into activism. The post found its way to me through old college friends who forwarded it with messages of support and shock. Reading Audrey's words, her admission that she'd participated in destroying an innocent woman's life, felt surreal. She was performing her guilt for an audience, making her redemption as public as my humiliation had been. During this circus of atonement, I made a decision that would protect Henry and me permanently. Aunt Peyton, despite her age and health issues, proved to be a fierce advocate when I explained the situation. She connected me with a family lawyer who specialized in protecting women from abusive situations. No father listed on the birth certificate means no legal rights, the lawyer explained during our consultation. As far as the law is concerned, this child has one parent. You maintain that position from birth, which strengthens your case significantly. We created what the lawyer called a legal firewall, documentation that would prevent any future custody claims, visitation demands, or interference in Henry's life. The process was thorough and emotionally draining, requiring me to provide detailed accounts of the false accusations, the public humiliation, and the complete abandonment I'd experienced. But there was one person who hadn't yet received my direct attention. Nick, the architect of this destruction, was still recovering from his illness, still hiding behind his family's attempts at reconciliation. I wrote him exactly one letter. One sentence on plain white paper. You destroyed a woman and created a mother. That child will never know your name. I never heard back. The pressure from Kevin's family eventually wore him down to the point of desperation. He began leaving increasingly frantic voicemails for Claire, begging for just one conversation, one chance to see his son, one opportunity to prove he'd changed. Against my better judgment and influenced by Claire's growing exhaustion with the situation, I finally agreed to meet him. Not at my apartment, not on my territory, but at a neutral location. A family restaurant with bright lights and plenty of witnesses. I brought Henry, curious to see Kevin's reaction to the child he'd rejected, the son he'd never held. Kevin arrived early and was already seated when Henry and I walked in. I watched his face as we approached the table, saw the exact moment recognition hit him like a physical blow. Henry, now walking confidently and chattering constantly, was an unmistakable miniature version of his father. "Hi," Henry said to Kevin with the fearless friendliness of a toddler, climbing into the booster seat across from this stranger who shared his eyes. Kevin stared at his son, our son, with an expression of wonder and devastation that was painful to witness. Henry smiled back, completely unaware of the seismic emotional shifts happening around him. I don't deserve him, do I? Kevin whispered, his voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. I said nothing. Because he was right. And some truths don't require acknowledgement to remain absolute. That single meeting at the restaurant changed everything and nothing all at once. Kevin's whispered acknowledgement, I don't deserve him, do I? Hung in the air between us like smoke from a dying fire. Henry, oblivious to the weight of the moment, had colored on his kids' menu and asked Kevin if he liked dinosaurs. The normalcy of childhood innocence against the backdrop of adult devastation created a surreal tableau that would replay in my mind for months. I established rules after that meeting. Rigid, non-negotiable boundaries that would govern any future contact. Kevin could see Henry once annually on Henry's birthday for exactly 2 hours, with Claire present as a neutral supervisor. No overnight visits. No family gatherings. No integration into the Morrison family dynamic that had destroyed us both. The first supervised visit happened when Henry turned 3. Kevin arrived with a carefully wrapped gift, a wooden train set that must have cost him a week's salary. He sat on Claire's living room floor, showing Henry how to connect the tracks while I watched from the kitchen doorway, my arms crossed like armor across my chest. What's your name? Henry had asked with typical toddler directness. I'm Kevin, he'd answered, his voice thick with emotion he was trying to contain. Mr. Kevin, Henry decided, as if testing how the name felt in his mouth. Do you have kids, Mr. Kevin? The question hit Kevin like a physical blow. I watched him struggle with the answer, his hands stilling on the wooden train cars. No, he finally said. No, I don't have kids. It was the truth in the most devastating way possible. Biologically, Henry was his son. Legally, emotionally, relationally, Henry belonged entirely to me. Kevin had forfeited any claim to fatherhood the night he chose his family's lies over his wife's truth. That pattern continued year after year. Kevin became Mr. Kevin, the nice man who brought expensive toys and looked sad when Henry hugged him goodbye. Henry never asked why Mr. Kevin came only once a year, never questioned why this man shared his eyes and smile. Children accept the reality they're given, and Henry's reality was me, Claire, and the life we'd built together. But Kevin's family underwent their own transformations, though I observed them from a distance like a scientist studying specimens under glass. Brittany's guilt had driven her to volunteer work at a women's shelter 2 hours away from her hometown, far enough that she wouldn't encounter anyone who knew our story. Claire heard through mutual connections that Brittany threw herself into the work with the desperation of someone seeking absolution through service. She specifically works with women who've been falsely accused or publicly shamed, Claire reported after running into a college friend who volunteered at the same shelter. Apparently, she's become quite the advocate. Helps them navigate legal systems, find safe housing, rebuild their lives. I felt no satisfaction in this knowledge, no sense that justice had been served. Brittany's transformation felt more like self-preservation than true redemption. A way to live with herself rather than genuine understanding of the damage she'd caused. Nora had channeled her guilt into journalism, writing articles for local magazines about domestic justice issues and the danger of rushing to judgment in family disputes. Her pieces were well-researched and thoughtfully written, though I detected the underlying current of personal experience that drove her passion for the subject. She'd become an expert on false accusations within families, the psychology of belief, and the lasting trauma of public humiliation. Audrey's path surprised me most. She'd left her corporate job to work with special needs children, dedicating herself to protecting the most vulnerable members of society. Her social media presence had evolved from personal updates to advocacy posts about children's rights and anti-bullying initiatives. The woman who dragged me through the streets had become someone who fought to ensure other children never experienced public shame. I didn't forgive any of them, but I recognized the change. Their guilt had transformed them into people who might actually prevent another woman from experiencing what I'd endured. It was a strange form of justice. My destruction had created advocates who might save others from similar fates. Meanwhile, Claire and I had discovered our own purpose in the wreckage. We'd started small, just conversations with women who'd reached out after Audrey's viral apology post. They found us through mutual friends, through support networks, through the underground railroad of women who'd survived false accusations and public shaming. Our support group met monthly in Claire's living room, then moved to a community center as our numbers grew. We called ourselves the Silent Strength, not because we stayed quiet, but but because we'd learned that sometimes the most powerful response to destruction was to rebuild louder than we'd been broken. "We don't scream," became our unofficial motto. "We don't fight. We walk away and rebuild." I shared my story carefully, focusing on the recovery rather than the trauma. How I'd created legal protections for Henry. How I'd established financial independence. How I'd built a life that couldn't be destroyed by other people's lies because it wasn't dependent on their validation. Other women shared their experiences. Wives accused of affairs they'd never had, mothers falsely reported for child abuse by vindictive ex-partners, professionals whose reputations had been destroyed by malicious gossip. We taught each other practical skills: legal documentation, financial protection, digital security, emotional boundaries. But perhaps the most powerful part of our meetings was the simple act of being believed. In a room full of women who'd experienced false accusations, no one questioned anyone's truth. No one demanded proof or evidence. We simply listened, believed, and helped each other heal. Nick remained the one loose thread in this tapestry of transformation. His physical health had recovered, but his isolation was complete and self-imposed. He'd lost his job when his role in my destruction became public knowledge. Old friends avoided him. Even his family maintained distance, their love for him tainted by the understanding of what he'd cost them all. I heard through Aunt Peyton's gossip network that he'd moved to a different state, working odd jobs and living alone in a studio apartment. His power, his ability to manipulate and destroy, had evaporated along with his credibility. He existed but didn't live, survived but didn't thrive. I never sent him another letter, never acknowledged his existence beyond that single sentence I'd written years earlier. His punishment wasn't my responsibility to enforce. It was simply the natural consequence of his choices, the isolation that comes from being the kind of person who destroys innocent lives for petty revenge. Sometimes, late at night when Henry was sleeping and the apartment was quiet, I reflected on the nature of revenge. I'd wanted to scream my truth, to fight back, to force them all to acknowledge what they'd done to me. Instead, I'd vanished. That silence had become my sword, cutting deeper and lasting longer than any confrontation could have achieved. My absence had destroyed them more effectively than my presence ever could have. They had to live with their choices, with their guilt, with the knowledge that they'd thrown away something precious and irreplaceable. I got to live with my son, my peace, and the unshakable knowledge that I'd survived their worst and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Revenge, I'd learned, wasn't what you did to people who hurt you. It was what you refused to let them take from you again. This story of silent revenge had you holding your breath. Hit that like button right now. My heart broke when Heather told Kevin, "Henry isn't yours to claim just because you feel sorry now." That line was everything. What moment hit you the hardest? Drop your favorite scene in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe and hit that bell because these stories of women who rebuild louder than they were broken will give you chills. During our family reunion, an unexpected call came through on my husband's phone. As it rang on speaker, a voice softly said, "I can't stop thinking about you." Without hesitation, I picked up the phone and smiled. "Why don't you come over?" I suggested. "It's the perfect time. I was just about to share some exciting news with everyone. I found your messages and I've already contacted a lawyer." The room froze. I never meant to look at Robert's phone that night. 5 years of marriage had built a foundation of trust between us. Or so I believed. The steam from his shower still fogged the bathroom mirror as I folded laundry on our bed, the mundane rhythm of domestic life playing out like any other Tuesday. Then his phone lit up on the nightstand, a single notification cutting through the dimness of our bedroom. "Missed the way you touched me last night. Can't wait until next week." My hands froze mid-fold on one of his button-down shirts. The preview text glowed accusingly from the lock screen. Robert had been on a business trip last night, a monthly occurrence with his real estate development firm. I set down the shirt with deliberate care, as if the fabric had suddenly become fragile. Before we continue with Sarah's journey, I want to pause for a moment. If you've ever felt that gnawing suspicion something wasn't right, or admired someone who found strength after betrayal, this story will resonate deeply. Please consider subscribing. It's completely free and connects you with others who appreciate these raw tales of reclaiming personal power. Now let's dive in. I picked up his phone, telling myself there must be some explanation. Some work colleague making an inappropriate joke. A text meant for someone else. Anything but what my instincts were screaming at me. The message disappeared as the screen timed out, and I placed the phone back exactly as I'd found it, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. When Robert emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, I kept folding clothes with mechanical precision. He noticed nothing unusual as he checked his phone, his face briefly illuminated by the screen's glow. I watched from the corner of my eye as his expression softened into a small smile before he typed a quick response. That smile, I'd thought it belonged only to me. "Everything okay?" he asked, slipping on his pajama bottoms. "Fine," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "Just tired." Sleep never came that night. I lay beside him, listening to the even rhythm of his breathing while my mind constructed and discarded 100 different scenarios. By morning, one thought crystallized through the fog of shock. I needed proof. For 3 days I maintained our normal routine. Breakfast together before work, texts throughout the day, dinner and TV in the evening. I played the role of contented wife while tracking his late-night phone habits and noting the passcode he entered when he thought I wasn't watching. On Friday, when he left his phone to grab coffee from the kitchen, I made my move. The message thread was there, under a contact simply labeled M. Dozens of exchanges stretching back 4 months. Intimate details. Meeting arrangements. Photos I couldn't bring myself to open. I took screenshots of the most damning evidence, sending them to my own private email before carefully backing out of the apps, leaving everything as I found it. The following Thursday, Robert packed for another overnight client meeting in Detroit. I kissed him goodbye at the door, my lips curved into the same trusting smile I'd perfected over our years together. "Drive safely," I said, like always. "I'll call you when I get to the hotel," he promised, like always. 20 minutes later, I was in my own car, following his familiar silver Audi at a careful distance. I'd never tailed anyone before, but I'd watched enough crime shows to maintain 3 cars between us, switching lanes periodically to avoid detection. The knot in my stomach tightened as he passed the exit for downtown Detroit, continuing another 15 miles to a boutique hotel in Birmingham, an upscale suburb we'd visited together for anniversary dinners. I parked across the street, watching as he checked in with the casual confidence of a regular guest. 40 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the lot. From it emerged a tall blonde woman in a fitted business suit whom I recognized immediately. Melissa Winters, the new agent at his firm. I'd met her at the company Christmas party just 3 months ago, where Robert had introduced us with his hand resting casually on my lower back. My phone captured their embrace in the lobby. Too intimate for colleagues, too familiar for a first encounter. Something inside me cracked as they walked toward the elevator, his hand finding the small of her back in the exact same way it had once guided me. That weekend, while Robert golfed with clients, I created an encrypted folder on my cloud drive. Home renovation ideas. I named it, knowing he'd never bother to look inside. Into it went the screenshots, the photos from the hotel, and a document where I began detailing dates, inconsistencies in his stories, and unexplained expenses I found while combing through our joint accounts. $340 at Tiffany's in February. I'd received no jewelry for Valentine's Day. $180 at Giovanni's Ristorante, an intimate Italian place, on a night he claimed to be at a business dinner at the steakhouse downtown. 3 separate gas receipts from stations along the route to Birmingham when he should have been in Detroit. Each new piece of evidence was another fracture in the image of our perfect marriage. The beautiful home in the suburbs, the plans for children next year, the vacations we'd meticulously saved for. I'd built my entire identity around being Robert's wife, and now that foundation was crumbling beneath my feet. On our 5th wedding anniversary, while we drank champagne at the restaurant where he'd proposed, I made my decision. The waiter had just brought our dessert, chocolate soufflé with 2 spoons, when Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, made a poor excuse about checking work emails, and typed a quick response. I recognized the smile he tried to hide, the same one I'd seen that first night after the shower. "Is everything okay at the office?" I asked innocently. "Just Johnson being anxious about the Westbrook property," he lied smoothly, sliding his phone back into his jacket pocket. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." That's when I knew. I wouldn't confront him, not yet. A hasty confrontation would give him time to hide assets, delete evidence, spin stories to our friends and family. Instead, I would be methodical, calculated. I would gather irrefutable proof and prepare myself legally before pulling the trigger. The perfect opportunity would present itself. And when it did, I would be ready. The morning after our anniversary dinner, I called in sick to my job at the elementary school for the first time in 3 years. As a 5th grade teacher, I prided myself on my reliability. My students needed consistency. But today, I needed answers more than my students needed their spelling lesson. I waited until Robert backed his Audi out of the driveway, his travel mug of coffee in hand and his goodbye kiss still cool against my cheek. Then I began my real work. Our home office had always been Robert's domain. Though we shared the space technically, his large mahogany desk dominated the room, while my small writing table sat in the corner. A fitting metaphor for our marriage, I now realized. His desk drawers weren't locked. Why would they be? Trust had never been questioned between us. The first 2 drawers contained ordinary office supplies, folders of home maintenance records and our tax returns. The bottom drawer stuck slightly, requiring an extra tug. Inside, beneath hanging files of mundane documents, I found a small burgundy folder tucked at the very back. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Inside were receipts, dozens of them, meticulously organized by date. Dinner for 2 at Morton's, $312. A weekend at the Townsend Hotel, where he'd supposedly been at a real estate conference, $760. A gold bracelet from Tiffany's, $1,200. My birthday had come and gone in March with only a bouquet of flowers and a dinner I had cooked myself. Each receipt was like a photograph, a snapshot of his other life that existed parallel to ours. I spread them across the desk, arranging them chronologically, and a clear pattern emerged. Every 3rd Thursday, sometimes extending to Friday morning. Occasionally a Tuesday evening. Always the same hotel. Usually the same restaurant. My next stop was our bank website. I'd always managed our household accounts, so I knew all the passwords. While I'd noticed the charges before, I'd never scrutinized each transaction, trusting Robert's explanations of client dinners and professional development seminars. Now I downloaded 6 months of credit card statements, highlighting every charge that aligned with his pattern of deception. The office felt too small suddenly, the walls closing in with each new discovery. I moved to the dining room table, spreading out my growing collection of evidence. The organizational skills that made me an effective teacher now served a different purpose as I created a detailed spreadsheet of dates, times, locations, and amounts. By noon, I had charted 8 months of consistent meetings. Their relationship beginning shortly after Melissa joined his firm. And still I needed more. I needed to hear it for myself. That evening, I suggested we clean out the spare bedroom to prepare it for future plans. Robert didn't question my sudden nesting instinct. We'd been talking about starting a family for months. Together, we rearranged furniture, bringing in a desk from the basement to create a temporary workspace. I might grade papers in here sometimes, I explained. The light is better. The truth, the spare room shared a wall with our bedroom. And that night, after installing a voice recording app on my phone, I left it hidden between books on the new desk before joining Robert for our evening routine. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight, I told him. I've got that slight headache again and I don't want to disturb you if I can't sleep. His concern seemed genuine as he brought me pain relievers and a glass of water. Once alone, I waited, listening to the familiar sounds of our home settling for the night. Around 11:30, I heard it, the low murmur of Robert's voice through the wall. The recording caught everything. His whispered endearments. Plans for their next meeting. Complaints about having to attend my cousin's wedding that weekend. I'd rather be with you, he told her, his voice tender in a way it hadn't been with me in months. Sleep eluded me as I re-listened to the recording 3 times, each word another nail in the coffin of our marriage. By morning my decision was made. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was calculated, ongoing betrayal. I called an attorney the next day. Not our family lawyer who had handled our house purchase and wills, but Diana Moore. A name I'd heard mentioned by a colleague who'd gone through a brutal divorce last year. Diana's office was nothing like I'd imagined. Instead of dark wood and leather, her space was filled with plants and natural light. The woman herself, with her silver-streaked bob and bright blue reading glasses perched on her nose, projected calm competence rather than aggressive litigation. "Tell me everything," she said after introductions, "and don't leave anything out. The surprises hurt most in court." For an hour, I laid out my discoveries while she took notes on a yellow legal pad. She asked pointed questions about our finances, property, and the evidence I'd collected. Michigan is a no-fault divorce state, Diana explained when I finished, but that doesn't mean evidence of infidelity is irrelevant. It can influence property division, especially if he's spent substantial marital assets on this relationship. She handed me a folder with information about divorce proceedings and a checklist of documents to gather. Start securing copies of all financial records, investment accounts, retirement funds, property deeds, insurance policies. Establish your own bank account if you don't have one. And Sarah, she added, sliding her business card across the desk, don't tip your hand too early. The element of surprise is sometimes our best advantage. I nodded, feeling more in control than I had in weeks. How much more evidence do I need? Diana leaned back in her chair, studying me over her glasses. You've got a solid start. But if possible, I'd like photographs placing them together, additional recordings establishing the relationship's nature, and documentation of any major purchases he's made for her. The more comprehensive our evidence, the stronger our position for negotiation. As I drove home, Diana's words echoed in my mind. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was building a case. And for the first time since finding that text message, I felt something beyond pain and betrayal. I felt purpose. Robert would be out of town again next Thursday. I marked the date on my calendar and began planning my next move. Thursday arrived with a relentless spring rain that matched my mood. I'd planned this day meticulously, calling in a personal day at school and telling Robert the first had a dentist appointment followed by lunch with my sister. He kissed me goodbye, reminding me he'd be home late due to a client dinner. Another lie to add to my growing collection. I waited 30 minutes after he left, then drove to Carson Realty's gleaming office building downtown. The rain provided perfect cover. Umbrella tilted forward, raincoat collar up. I was just another anonymous visitor seeking shelter from the downpour. The reception area buzzed with morning activity as agents filtered in, shaking off umbrellas and clutching coffee cups. I'm looking for Melissa Winters, I told the receptionist, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. I'm interested in listing my property. Ms. Winters is in a morning meeting. Would you like to leave your information? Actually, I'll wait, I replied, settling into a chair with a clear view of the office floor. Through the glass partitions I could see Robert in the conference room standing at a whiteboard. The quarterly sales meeting, he'd mentioned it last week. 20 minutes later the meeting broke up. Agents spilled out into the main floor, Robert among them, laughing with a tall blonde woman. Melissa Winters. I'd seen her at the hotel and at last year's Christmas party, but now I studied her with new eyes. Designer suit, perfect manicure, wedding ring conspicuously absent. She touched Robert's arm as they talked, the gesture casual but intimate. Too intimate. I slipped out before either could spot me, my reconnaissance mission complete. Back in my car, I pulled up the company website on my phone, navigating to the Our Team page. Melissa's professional biography revealed she joined the firm 18 months ago after relocating from Chicago. 18 months. The timeline matched perfectly with when Robert's behavior had begun to change. At home, I opened our wedding album, a beautiful leather-bound book I hadn't looked at in months. I flipped through reception photos, scanning faces in the background, looking for someone I'd missed before. And there she was, in a group shot at table 7. Melissa Winters, 5 years younger, with darker hair but unmistakably her, smiling next to Robert's college roommate Tom. She'd been at our wedding, witnessed our vows, eaten our food, then systematically worked to dismantle everything those vows represented. The betrayal twisted deeper, more personal than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about sex or emotional connection. This was about someone who had observed our happiness and deliberately targeted it. Or had Robert been the instigator? The sick feeling in my stomach intensified as questions multiplied without answers. I needed more information. Tom might know something. He and Robert still played basketball monthly. I scrolled through my contacts and composed a carefully casual text. Hi Tom. Putting together a surprise for Robert's birthday. Didn't you bring a friend to our wedding? Melissa something? Does she still live in the area? His reply came an hour later. Melissa Winters? Yeah, she's actually working with Rob now. Small world, right? They've gotten pretty close. She still asks about Rob whenever I see her. The words, Pretty Close stared back at me from the screen. How many people knew? How many friends had chosen loyalty to Robert over basic human decency? I turned to technology next, logging into our family cloud account to search for any digital breadcrumbs. Robert wasn't particularly tech-savvy. He often needed my help syncing devices or backing up photos. This carelessness became my advantage. In a subfolder labeled Work Conference San Diego, I found them. Photos never meant for my eyes. Robert and Melissa on a beach at sunset. Intimate dinner photos with wine glasses raised in toast. A selfie of them kissing on a hotel balcony with the ocean behind them. The timestamp, 3 months ago during his supposed regional sales conference. The background showed clearly the Coronado Beach Resort. Definitely not the downtown Marriott where the conference had been held. I forwarded the evidence to my secure email, hands shaking with a mixture of vindication and devastation. Each discovery was both a victory for my case and another wound to my heart. The next day I ran into Jessica, another agent from Carson Realty, at the grocery store. We'd been friendly at company events, though not close. I mentioned casually that I'd been thinking of stopping by the office to surprise Robert for lunch. "Oh, Fridays are his off-site days with Melissa," she said absently, examining avocados. "They usually work from that coffee shop on Maple." Her expression shifted as she realized what she'd revealed. "I mean, they have client meetings." "How long has that been their routine?" I asked, my voice betraying nothing. Jessica looked uncomfortable. "Maybe ask Robert? I don't want to get in the middle." "Of course," I smiled reassuringly. "Just curious about his schedule." That evening I received a text from Jessica. "I'm sorry about earlier. It felt wrong not to say something. Everyone at the office knows about them. It's been going on for at least a year. Robert claimed you two had an understanding. I should have said something sooner." An understanding. The audacity of his lie stunned me. He'd not only betrayed me but had created a narrative that made me complicit in my own humiliation. Back at my laptop, I created a new document in my evidence folder. Timeline of betrayal. Meticulously, I plotted every date, location, witness account, and piece of evidence. 18 months of deception laid out in cold, hard facts. The pattern was unmistakable. What had begun as occasional meetings had evolved into regular rendezvous, growing bolder and more frequent. Diana had advised collecting comprehensive evidence, and now I had it. Financial records, photographs, witness statements, and a detailed timeline spanning a year and a half of my marriage. The case was solid. Yet something made me hesitate before calling her. The final piece was still missing. The perfect moment to reveal what I knew, a moment that would leave no room for Robert's excuses or manipulation. The answer came when I checked our shared calendar. In 2 weeks, the annual Carson family reunion at our lake house. Robert's parents, siblings, cousins, everyone who mattered to him would be there. I picked up my phone and called Diana. "I'm ready to proceed," I told her. "But I need your advice on timing." "The family reunion is perfect timing," Diana said, her voice calm and measured through the phone. "But are you absolutely certain you want to do it so publicly?" I stood at our kitchen window, looking out at the lake that had sold us on this house 3 years ago. The water rippled in the afternoon sunlight, deceptively peaceful. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. He humiliated me in front of his entire office. Let him face the consequences in front of his family. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Robert's mother, Eleanor. The annual Carson family reunion had rotated between homes for generations. This year had been scheduled at Robert's brother's place in Grand Rapids, but with a new baby and recent renovation delays, he was struggling to host. "We'd be happy to host at the lake house," I wrote, infusing the message with my usual warmth. "The weather should be perfect, and we haven't had everyone over since we finished the deck expansion." Eleanor's enthusiastic acceptance arrived within the hour, along with offers to help coordinate. Robert was thrilled when I told him that evening, kissing my cheek and calling me the perfect wife. I smiled and leaned into his embrace, wondering if he could feel how rigid my body had become at his touch. The next 2 weeks became an exercise in strategic planning and emotional compartmentalization. By day, I was the devoted wife preparing to welcome her extended family. Ordering supplies, planning menus, coordinating sleeping arrangements for out-of-town guests. By night, I methodically prepared for the aftermath of what I would do. I visited our bank on a quiet Tuesday morning, requesting access to our safe deposit box. Inside, I added my grandmother's jewelry and the deed to the small cabin in northern Michigan that I'd inherited before our marriage. Then I opened a new box in my name only, securing copies of our financial records, my evidence folder, and a set of house and car keys. That same afternoon, I opened a separate checking account at a different bank, transferring a modest amount from my personal savings. Enough to cover immediate expenses after the explosion, but not so much that Robert could claim financial impropriety. Just organizing my classroom supply fund, I explained when he questioned the bank statement. He accepted the explanation without further inquiry, his attention already drifting to his phone where Melissa had undoubtedly texted. The guest list required careful consideration. Eleanor and William, Robert's parents, were non-negotiable. They'd always treated me like a daughter, and their presence would ensure maximum impact. His brother James and sister-in-law Caitlin with their new baby would provide the wholesome family contrast. His sister Emily, always my strongest ally in the family, would be crucial support. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins completed the tableau of witnesses. 10 days before the reunion, I stood in our walk-in closet, mentally dividing our possessions. The cashmere sweaters he'd given me for Christmas. Did I even want them anymore? The framed photos throughout the house. Which would I take when this was over? I removed my most treasured possessions discreetly, a few items each day, storing them in the trunk of my car before transferring them to my sister's garage. Spring cleaning, I told Robert when he noticed missing items. Just decluttering before everyone arrives. Each night after he fell asleep, I practiced in the bathroom mirror. The exact words I would say. The precise tone, not hysterical, not bitter, but calm and resolute. I rehearsed different scenarios. If he denied everything, if he tried to turn the family against me, if he became angry. I prepared for every possibility except the one I feared most. That when the moment came, my resolve would crumble under the weight of 5 years of love and shared dreams. A week before the reunion, I visited the lake house alone, ostensibly to begin preparations. In reality, I needed time and the space to mentally block out how the scene would unfold. I stood in the great room, mapping the likely positions of family members, considering sight lines and acoustics. Where would Robert be standing? Where should I position myself for maximum control of the situation? It was theatrical direction for the most important performance of my life. I rehung family photos that suddenly felt like props. Robert and me on our honeymoon in Bali, the whole Carson clan at last year's reunion, the professional portrait we'd taken for our Christmas card. Behind each smiling image lay 1,000 moments of genuine happiness that now felt contaminated. Had he been thinking of her even then? Had any of it been real? 3 days before the event, I met with Diana again, reviewing our strategy for the immediate aftermath. Have a bag packed, she advised. Once it happens, you'll want space from each other. Do you have somewhere to stay? My sister's, I confirmed. She's prepared the guest room. Good. And you've secured your important documents. I nodded, patting my purse where copies of our marriage certificate, tax returns, and property deeds now resided alongside my driver's license and credit cards. I want to make sure you remember this is going to be emotionally taxing, Diana said, her typically brisk tone softening. No matter how prepared you are, when the moment comes, it will hurt. Are you absolutely sure this is how you want to handle it? For a moment, doubt crept in. Would a private confrontation be kinder? More dignified? Then I remembered Jessica's text. Robert claimed you two had an understanding. The public humiliation he'd already subjected me to while painting himself as the reasonable husband in an open marriage. I'm sure, I said firmly. He doesn't deserve privacy or dignity. Not anymore. The day before the reunion, I made one final preparation. I wrote a letter to Robert, sealing it in an envelope to give him afterward. Not a letter of explanation, he deserved none, but a letter of goodbye to the man I had thought he was, the life I had believed we shared. Writing it was cathartic, releasing emotions I couldn't afford to express during tomorrow's calculated confrontation. That night, Robert wrapped his arms around me in bed, whispering how grateful he was for handling the reunion preparations. How lucky he felt to have me. I lay still in his embrace, my body a perfect alabaster statue of wifely devotion, while inside, a storm gathered strength. Tomorrow the stage would be set. The actors would take their places. And the performance of a lifetime would begin. The morning of the reunion dawned with perfect blue skies, the kind of late spring day that had sold us on the lake house in the first place. I woke before Robert, sliding quietly from bed to begin preparations with a calm I didn't truly feel. By the time he joined me in the kitchen, I was arranging pastries on my grandmother's antique serving tray. "You didn't have to let me sleep in," he said, kissing my cheek. "I could have helped." I smiled, the expression now so practiced it felt like a mask I could slip on and off at will. "You'll have plenty to do once everyone arrives." Your mother texted, "They're about 30 minutes out." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. I moved through our home with mechanical efficiency, setting out drinks, arranging furniture on the deck, placing flowers in strategic locations. Robert manned the grill, occasionally catching my eye to smile or wink conspiratorially, as if we were teammates hosting this gathering rather than performers in the final act of our marriage. Eleanor arrived first with William, embracing me with genuine affection. "The place looks beautiful, Sarah," she exclaimed, handing me a homemade blueberry pie. "You've outdone yourself." "You know I love hosting," I replied, accepting the pie with a warm smile that didn't reach my eyes. Had she noticed the slight tremor in my hands? If so, she attributed it to the excitement of the day rather than the emotional tempest brewing inside me. By noon, our property teemed with Carson family members, 36 in total, from Robert's 90-year-old grandmother to his cousin's newborn daughter. They sprawled across the deck and lawn, voices mingling with laughter and the gentle lapping of lake water against our private dock. I moved among them with practiced grace, refilling drinks, directing people to food, engaging in small talk while maintaining emotional distance. "Sarah, this potato salad is divine," Robert's Aunt Margaret declared, helping herself to seconds. "You simply must share the recipe." "Family secret," I responded with a wink, knowing I'd never speak to this woman again after today. At 2 o'clock, Robert approached me near the beverage table, wiping sweat from his brow. "James is asking about the fishing gear. Do we still have those extra rods in the garage?" "Check the storage bin near the kayaks," I instructed, watching as he pulled his phone from his pocket to check the time. "Thanks. Can you make sure Mom knows the burgers will be ready in 20 minutes? He set his phone down on the small wicker table beside me and headed toward the garage, pausing to chat with various relatives along the way. I stared at the phone, its black screen innocuous against the white tablecloth. For a moment, I considered the cosmic timing. Was this opportunity mere coincidence, or had the universe finally aligned to deliver justice? Either way, I wasn't about to squander the moment. I continued arranging drink pitchers, keeping one eye on the abandoned phone. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Robert became engrossed in a conversation with his brother and cousin near the dock, gesturing animatedly about something involving fishing lures. His phone remained forgotten. The first vibration was subtle. I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching so intently. The screen illuminated with an unsaved number, just digits without a name. I glanced toward Robert, still deeply engaged in conversation a good 50 yards away. The call ended. The screen went dark. 2 minutes later it vibrated again, same number. Again I let it ring through to voicemail. I picked up my glass of lemonade, taking a slow sip while maintaining my position near the forgotten device. Around me, the reunion continued in full swing. Eleanor organizing an impromptu group photo, children chasing each other across the lawn, William telling his famous college football stories to anyone who would listen. The third call came just as I was considering moving away from my post. Again the same number. This time I picked up the phone, holding it in my palm as it vibrated insistently. Robert remained oblivious, now helping his brother launch a kayak into the lake. When the screen went dark again, doubt flickered briefly. Was I ready for what would come next? The question vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment. I was more than ready. The fourth call came less than a minute later. This time I didn't hesitate. I swiped to answer, raising the phone to my ear without speaking. "Robert." Melissa's voice was breathy, intimate. "I know you're busy with family stuff, but I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was amazing." In that moment, a strange calm settled over me. All the anxiety, all the rehearsing, all the uncertainty, everything distilled into perfect clarity. I pressed the speaker button, making sure her voice would carry. "Why don't you come over?" I suggested, my voice steady and clear. Heads turned toward me, conversations pausing mid-sentence. It's the perfect time. Robert's head snapped up from across the yard, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to horror in the span of heartbeats. I found your messages, I continued, voice projecting across the suddenly silent gathering, and I've already contacted a lawyer. Melissa's sharp intake of breath was audible through the speaker. Who is this? She demanded, though she must have already known. This is Sarah, Robert's wife. I emphasized the last word, watching as Robert abandoned the kayak and began moving rapidly toward me. We're having our family reunion today. Everyone's here, his parents, siblings, cousins, and now they all know about you too. Oh my God, Melissa whispered. Sarah, Save it, I interrupted. I've seen the photos from San Diego. I know you were at our wedding. I know everything. Robert reached me, his face ashen. Sarah, please, he said, reaching for the phone. Give me the phone. I held it away from him, maintaining eye contact. Why? So you can explain how this is all a misunderstanding? How I've got it all wrong? I turned back to the phone. Melissa, he told his entire office that we had an understanding. Did he tell you that too? The silence that followed was answer enough. William and Eleanor stood frozen by the picnic table, identical expressions of shock on their faces. James had abandoned the kayak halfway onto the shore. Even the children had stopped playing, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. I handed the phone to Robert, who took it with trembling fingers. She's all yours now, I said, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I'm certainly not. As I walked away, I heard Melissa's voice still emanating from the speaker. Robert? Robert, what's happening? Behind me, the perfect family reunion collapsed into chaos, exactly as I had planned. I stood in the center of the stunned silence, feeling strangely detached from the chaos unfolding around me. Robert stared at the phone in his hand as if it were a venomous snake, Melissa's voice still faintly audible through the speaker. Hang up, I said quietly. His eyes met mine, pleading. Sarah, please, let me explain. There is nothing to explain. My voice carried across the yard, steady and clear. 18 months, Robert. Hotel receipts. Jewelry she wore that was meant for me. Vacations disguised as business trips. What exactly is there to explain? He finally pressed the end call button, silencing Melissa mid-sentence. The absence of her voice somehow made the moment more intense, forcing everyone's attention to the confrontation happening in their midst. Eleanor broke from her frozen position by the picnic table, moving toward us with uncertain steps. Robert? What is Sarah talking about? Robert's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, his usual smooth confidence evaporated completely. For a man who sold multi-million-dollar properties with charismatic ease, he suddenly couldn't form a single coherent sentence. Go ahead, I encouraged him, crossing my arms. Tell your mother about Melissa. Tell her how you've been sleeping with her for over a year while pretending to be on business trips. Tell her how you told everyone at your office that we had an open marriage, to justify your behavior. William approached slowly, his weathered hand gripping Eleanor's shoulder for support, or perhaps to steady himself. His face had aged 10 years in 10 minutes, deep lines etched around his mouth as he stared at his son. Is this true? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The anguish in his father's voice seemed to pierce Robert's shock. Dad, it's complicated. It's a yes or no question, William interrupted, something I'd never heard him do before. Have you been unfaithful to Sarah? Robert looked around wildly, taking in the ring of shocked faces. His brother James, sister-in-law Caitlin holding their baby, cousins and aunts and uncles all staring in disbelief. He was searching for an ally, an escape route, finding none. Yes, he finally admitted, the word hanging in the air like a gunshot. But it's not what you think. Things between Sarah and me haven't been right for a long time. That's news to me, I cut in. But then I'm not the one who's been living a double life. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, a small wounded sound escaping her. She had always been proud of her close relationship with me, often bragging to friends about how lucky her son was to have found such a perfect match. Now her illusions were shattering alongside mine. I trusted you, she said to Robert, tears welling in her eyes. We all did. Robert reached for her hand. Mom, please. She stepped back, avoiding his touch. The rejection was small but devastating. In 20 seconds he'd lost not just a wife but a mother's unconditional approval. His sister Emily pushed through the crowd, placing herself between Robert and me. "How dare you?" she hissed at her brother. "After everything Sarah has done for this family?" His cousin Tyler snorted from near the grill. "Always thought you were too slick for your own good, Rob. Guess we know where all those client dinners really went." The murmurs grew louder, a rising tide of judgment and disappointment washing through the gathered family. Robert stood alone in the center, isolation forming around him like a physical barrier. "Everyone please," he finally said, raising his voice. "This is between Sarah and me. It's a private matter." "Is it?" I challenged. "When you made it public to your entire office. When you humiliated me behind my back. When you brought Melissa to our wedding." That last revelation sent another wave of shocked whispers through the gathering. Robert looked genuinely surprised. "What are you talking about?" "Table 7, I said coldly. "Check the wedding album. She was Tom's +1. She sat 15 feet away from us while we exchanged vows." Something cracked in William then. He slammed his palm against the picnic table with unexpected force, causing plates to jump and glasses to topple. "Enough," he shouted, his face flushed with anger. "You bring another woman to your own wedding, and then you sleep with her behind your wife's back? Who raised you to behave this way? Because it certainly wasn't your mother and me." Robert flinched as if physically struck. In his entire life, I had never seen his father raise his voice to him. William had always been Robert's greatest champion, defending his every decision, celebrating his every success. That unwavering support had evaporated in an instant. "Dad," he began. "Don't dad me," William cut him off. "Your grandfather built this family on integrity. On keeping your word. On honoring your commitments." His voice broke slightly. "He would be ashamed to see what you've done." Eleanor began to cry openly now, supported by Robert's Aunt Patricia. James approached his brother, speaking low enough that only those nearby could hear. "How could you do this to her? To all of us?" I watched the family close ranks, not around Robert as they always had before, but around me. Emily's arm slipped around my waist. Caitlin approached with the baby, offering silent support with her presence. Even Tyler's wife Jessica, whom I'd only met twice before, moved to stand beside me. Robert looked around at the wall of disapproval surrounding him, realization dawning that he had miscalculated severely. His careful compartmentalization of his two lives had collapsed completely, leaving him exposed and alone. "Sarah," he said, his voice catching. "Can we please talk privately? Please." I shook my head slowly. "I've given you 5 years of privacy, Robert. I think we're beyond that now." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This is the name and number of my attorney. She's expecting your call." His hand trembled as he took the paper, reality finally sinking in. "You're really doing this?" "You did this," I corrected him. "I'm just ending it." The finality in my voice seemed to ripple through the gathering. Whatever they had expected from this family reunion, laughter, reminiscing, strengthening bonds, this public implosion of a marriage many had considered ideal had permanently altered the Carson family dynamic. As I turned to walk toward the house, Emily still at my side, I heard William's voice behind me. "Robert, get your things. You won't be staying here tonight." The father had chosen sides. And for the first time in Robert's charmed life, he wasn't the favored son. Emily followed me into the house, closing the French doors behind us to muffle the commotion still erupting in the backyard. The sudden quiet felt surreal after the intensity of the confrontation. For a moment we stood in silence in the kitchen, the reunion continuing its implosion outside the windows. "I knew something was wrong," Emily finally said, filling a glass with water and pressing it into my hands. "You've seemed different these past few months. But I never imagined this." I took a sip, realizing my throat was bone dry from the adrenaline. I didn't want anyone to know until I had everything in place. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks, I answered, setting the glass down on the counter. But looking back, I think part of me suspected something much longer. I just didn't want to see it. Emily's eyes widened. 3 weeks. And you still hosted this reunion? Planned all this? She gestured around at the immaculate house with its carefully arranged platters and decorations. A small, grim smile crossed my face. I wanted witnesses. I wanted his family to see who he really is. Outside, I could see Robert gesturing frantically, William shaking his head firmly. Eleanor sat at the picnic table, Aunt Patricia's arm around her shoulders. Most of the extended family had pulled back, clustering in uncomfortable groups, unsure whether to leave or stay. "What happens now?" Emily asked. "Now," I said, pulling a small overnight bag from the pantry where I'd hidden it that morning, "I finish what I started." I moved through the house with purpose, collecting items I'd mentally inventoried weeks ago. My laptop. The folder of financial documents from my desk. The small jewelry box containing my grandmother's pearls. The framed photo of my parents on their 30th anniversary. The only family picture I wanted from our curated collection. Emily trailed behind me, watching silently as I methodically gathered the fragments of my independent life. When I reached the master bedroom, I paused, steeling myself before entering what had once been our shared sanctuary. I'd slept beside him in that king-sized bed just last night, maintaining my charade until the final moment. "You don't have to go," Emily said from the doorway. "This is your house too." "I know," I replied, opening the closet to retrieve the outfit I'd laid out that morning, clean clothes untainted by the memory of playing perfect hostess. "But I can't stay here tonight. Not with all the echoes." I changed quickly in the bathroom, leaving behind the flowery sundress I'd chosen for the reunion. It felt symbolic somehow, shedding the costume I'd worn for my final performance as Robert's wife. When we returned downstairs, Robert was waiting in the living room, his face haggard. He'd clearly been crying, something I'd seen only twice in our marriage. William stood beside him, arms crossed, expression grim. "Sarah," Robert began, taking a step toward me. "Please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I glanced at William, who nodded slightly. "5 minutes," I agreed. "Emily, would you mind waiting for me on the porch?" When they'd left, closing the door behind them, Robert sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said. "But you have to believe I love you. This thing with Melissa, it was stupid. Meaningless. I can end it, go to counseling, whatever it takes." 18 months isn't meaningless, Robert," I replied, remaining standing. "And you didn't just cheat, you lied to everyone. You created an entire alternate life." "I was weak," he admitted. "Selfish. But losing you." His voice broke. "I can't lose you, Sarah." For a brief, treacherous moment, I felt a flicker of the love that had sustained me for 5 years. Then I remembered the photos from San Diego. The jewelry receipts. The calculated deceptions. "You already have," I said quietly. "The moment you chose her the first time." He looked up sharply. "So that's it? 5 years of marriage just over?" "It was over long before today. I just didn't know it." I shouldered my bag. "Diana Moore has the divorce papers ready. This doesn't need to be messier than it already is." "And if I fight it?" he challenged, a flash of the old Robert, confident, entitled, emerging through his distress. "Then you'll lose twice," I said simply. "The evidence is comprehensive. And after today, I don't think you want your family witnessing more of your choices in court depositions." The fight drained from him visibly. "What about the house? Our accounts?" "Talk to your lawyer," I replied. "Mine is very clear on what I'm entitled to." As I turned to leave, he called after me, "Where will you go? That's no longer your concern." I paused at the door. "Your father says you should pack whatever you need for a few days. After that, we can arrange times for you to collect the rest when I'm not here." Outside, the reunion had largely dissolved. Most of the extended family had made awkward departures, leaving only the immediate family members. Emily waited on the porch swing, my car keys already in her hand. "Dad's taking Robert to a hotel," she explained. "Mom's staying with Aunt Patricia tonight." I nodded, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline ebbed. "Thank you for standing by me today." "You're still my sister," she said firmly, "regardless of what happens with him." Eleanor approached slowly from the garden, her eyes red-rimmed but her posture resolute. I braced myself for recrimination. Many mothers would instinctively defend their sons regardless of the circumstances. Instead, she embraced me tightly. "I am so sorry," she whispered against my hair. "So deeply sorry for what he's done to you." Her unconditional support cracked something in my carefully maintained composure. For the first time since discovering Robert's betrayal, I allowed myself to truly cry, releasing weeks of calculated restraint in her arms. When we finally separated, she cupped my face gently. "Whatever happens next, you will always be family to us. Remember that." As Emily drove me to her house, I made 3 phone calls. First to Diana, confirming the day's events and next steps. Then to the locksmith I'd researched, scheduling an appointment for the following morning. Finally to my school principal, requesting an additional personal day. With each call, another piece of my independent life clicked into place. The Sarah who existed before Robert, confident, self-sufficient, uncompromised, was emerging from the shadows of a marriage built on illusions. That night, in Emily's spare bedroom, I opened my laptop and systematically changed every password Robert might know. Email, banking, social media, cloud storage. With each new password, I felt another link in the chain binding us together snap free. The last thing I did before sleep claimed me was delete his contact from my phone. Not blocked, simply deleted. As if he'd never existed. Tomorrow would bring complications, negotiations, the messy business of untangling 2 lives. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of my temporary sanctuary, I felt something unexpected: relief. For the first time in 18 months, I wasn't sharing my husband with a ghost. The week following the reunion unfolded in a series of practical steps that kept me focused despite the emotional turbulence. I returned to the lake house on Monday, accompanied by the locksmith and Emily, who had taken a day off work to support me. We changed every lock, reprogrammed the garage door opener, and reset the security system codes. The tangible clicks of new tumblers falling into place felt like punctuation marks at the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. "Are you sure you want to stay here?" Emily asked as we walked through the eerily quiet house. Without the usual soundtrack of Robert's morning news shows or evening phone calls, the space felt hollow, like a stage set after the actors had gone home. "For now," I replied, running my hand along the kitchen counter. "I need to reclaim this space before I decide whether to keep it or sell it." Diana called twice daily with updates. Robert had retained counsel, a high-profile divorce attorney known for representing wealthy businessmen. They had requested a private meeting to discuss terms amicably, an overture Diana advised me to decline. "They're testing to see if you'll waver," she explained during our Wednesday check-in. "The evidence is solid. We proceed as planned." On Thursday morning, while organizing financial documents in the home office, I discovered a small velvet ring box hidden in Robert's desk. A 2-carat diamond earring set I'd never seen before. The receipt tucked inside showed a purchase date just 3 weeks earlier. Another gift meant for Melissa, bought with our joint funds. I photographed it as additional evidence, then sealed it in an envelope for Diana. The first cracks in my composure appeared that evening when I found Robert's favorite coffee mug in the dishwasher. Such a mundane object. A navy blue ceramic cup with "World's Best Realtor" printed in faded letters. A gag gift from his first year in the business. I stood frozen in the kitchen, holding this relic of our domestic life, and suddenly found myself hurling it against the wall, a primal scream tearing from my throat as it shattered. I sank to the kitchen floor amid the ceramic shards, finally allowing myself to fully feel the grief that had been overshadowed by righteous anger and tactical planning. I wasn't just mourning a failed marriage but the death of a future I'd believed in. The children we'd planned to have, the retirement we'd mapped out, the lifetime of shared memories that would never exist. Emily found me there an hour later during her daily check-in visit. Without comment, she helped me sweep up the broken pieces, then poured 2 glasses of wine. "It gets easier," she said, sitting beside me at the kitchen island. "Not today or tomorrow, but eventually." "Did you know?" I asked suddenly. "About Robert and Melissa? Did anyone in the family suspect?" She looked down at her wine glass. "I saw them once," she admitted reluctantly. "At a restaurant in Ann Arbor about 6 months ago. They were in a corner booth, holding hands across the table." She swallowed hard. "I convinced myself I was misinterpreting something. That it was a client meeting or, I don't know. I didn't want to believe it." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I should have," she said, eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I think I was trying to protect everyone, you, him, our parents. It was cowardly." I reached for her hand. "It's not your burden to carry." It never was. The following Tuesday brought an unexpected development. I was grocery shopping, a strangely liberating experience. buying only foods I enjoyed without considering Robert's preferences. When I turned my cart down the cereal aisle and came face to face with Melissa Winters, we both froze, recognition immediate. She looked different from the confident professional I'd glimpsed at the hotel. Smaller somehow, with dark circles under her eyes and hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. The grocery basket hanging from her arm contained a pint of ice cream, a bottle of wine, and a package of Oreos. The universal shopping list of heartbreak. "Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My carefully constructed composure threatened to crack. Here was the woman who had systematically dismantled my marriage, standing in the cereal aisle of my regular grocery store as if she belonged in my world. "You should shop elsewhere," I said coldly, turning my cart to leave. "Wait," she called after me. "Please. 5 minutes." Every instinct screamed to keep walking, to deny her the closure of explanation or apology. But a small, persistent voice reminded me that understanding her perspective might help exorcise the questions that still haunted my sleepless nights. "For minutes," I conceded, wheeling my cart to a quieter corner near the pharmacy. "I ended it," she began without preamble. "After the call. After what happened at your reunion." "Congratulations on finally developing a conscience," I replied, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. She flinched but continued. "I deserved that. I deserve worse." She set her basket on the floor, hands trembling slightly. "He told me you were separated. Living together for appearances but essentially divorced. And you believed that?" I challenged. "Despite seeing our wedding photos on his desk? Despite the fact that I attended every company function as his wife?" "I wanted to believe it," she admitted, gaze dropping to the floor. "By the time I realized the truth, I was already..." She trailed off. "In love with him," I finished flatly. "How convenient for your conscience." "Not anymore," she said quietly. "The man I thought I knew doesn't exist. The way he tried to manipulate everyone after your confrontation." She shook her head. "It was like watching a mask slip, revealing someone I didn't recognize." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, two women damaged by the same man in different ways. "Did you know I was at your wedding?" she finally asked. "I found the photos," I confirmed. "Table 7. You came with Tom." She nodded slowly. "I barely knew Robert then. We met briefly at the rehearsal dinner. I never imagined." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that he's lost everything now. Not just you and his family's respect, but me too. Whatever game he was playing, he's left with nothing." I studied her face, searching for manipulation or hidden agenda, finding only exhaustion and regret. "That brings me remarkably little comfort," I said honestly. "I didn't expect it would," she replied. "But you should know you're not alone in seeing through him now." She picked up her basket. "I'm moving back to Chicago next month. You won't have to worry about running into me again." As she turned to leave, a question escaped me before I could reconsider. "Was any of it real? What he said to you? What he felt?" She paused, considering. "I don't think Robert knows what real is anymore. He spent so long crafting different versions of himself for different people that I'm not sure even he knows which one is authentic." Her sad smile held no triumph, only shared recognition of painful truth. "For what it's worth, I think what he felt for you in the beginning was as real as he's capable of." She walked away, disappearing around the corner, leaving me standing alone with my half-filled shopping cart and the strange, unexpected weight of pity, not for myself, but for both women who had built lives around a man who existed only in carefully crafted reflections. The divorce proceedings moved more swiftly than I had anticipated. Whether from shame, guilt, or simple pragmatism, Robert didn't contest the division of assets Diana proposed. The lake house was sold, the proceeds split along with our investments and savings. My meticulous documentation of his financial infidelity, the gifts, trips, and dinners purchased for Melissa with our joint funds, resulted in a settlement that slightly favored me, a small victory that felt more symbolic than significant. I signed the final papers 6 months after the reunion, in Diana's sun-drenched office with its thriving plants. The moment should have felt momentous, but as I watched my signature dry on the document, I felt only a quiet acknowledgement of an ending long overdue. "Congratulations," Diana said, sliding the papers into a folder. "You're officially divorced." Thank you, I replied, surprising myself with a genuine smile. For everything. What's next for you? She asked, removing her reading glasses. It was a question I'd been considering deeply. The settlement had left me financially secure, with enough to start over however I chose. The school year had ended, and for the first time in my adult life, I had no obligations to anyone but myself. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. But I'm looking forward to finding out. That evening, I invited Emily and my sister Kate over to my new apartment. A bright, airy space overlooking the river, with walls I'd painted myself in shades of blue and green. We opened a bottle of champagne, not to celebrate the end of my marriage but to toast the beginning of whatever came next. To Sarah 2.0, Kate declared, raising her glass. Stronger, wiser, and finally free to become whoever she wants. It was a nice sentiment, but the reality of rebuilding proved more complicated. My identity had been so thoroughly entwined with Robert's that I sometimes caught myself making decisions based on his preferences. Reaching for wines he would have chosen, avoiding restaurants he disliked, second-guessing career moves through the lens of what would have fit our shared life. I started small. I enrolled in a photography class I'd always wanted to take but had postponed because it conflicted with Robert's bowling league nights. I let my hair grow longer, no longer maintaining the shoulder-length cut he had preferred. I adopted a rescue cat, a scraggly orange tabby with a crooked tail, despite Robert's lifelong insistence that he was allergic. What's his name? The shelter volunteer asked as I completed the adoption paperwork. I studied the cat's defiant green eyes, his resilient spirit despite whatever hardships had brought him to the shelter. Phoenix, I decided. His name is Phoenix. Summer turned to fall, and with it came an unexpected opportunity. The principal at my school approached me about developing a special arts integrated curriculum for struggling readers. A project that would combine my teaching experience with my newfound passion for photography and visual storytelling. It would mean reducing your classroom hours, she explained. More administrative work, curriculum development. But I think you'd be perfect for it. Before Robert, I would have jumped at the chance. During our marriage, I had downplayed my career ambitions, focusing instead on creating the perfect home environment to support his success. Now I said yes without hesitation. The project consumed my fall and winter in the best possible way. I worked long hours, collaborating with art teachers and literacy specialists, developing a program that used visual narrative to engage students who struggled with traditional text. When we launched a pilot class in January, watching disengaged students suddenly find their voices through photography and storytelling felt like witnessing small miracles daily. Eleanor called regularly, our relationship evolving from in-law cordiality to genuine friendship. William sent thoughtful birthday and Christmas gifts. Emily remained my strongest ally, Sunday brunches at her house becoming a cherished ritual. Robert's family had chosen to keep me in their lives, a decision that both touched and occasionally complicated my healing process. Have you heard from him? Eleanor asked carefully during one of our monthly phone calls, nearly 10 months after the divorce. No, I answered truthfully. Not directly. Through mutual connections, I knew the broad outlines of his life. He had moved to Chicago, presumably following Melissa, though whether they had reconciled remained unclear. His career continued successfully. Betrayal, it seemed, was no impediment to selling luxury real estate. It's probably better that way, Eleanor acknowledged. But I want you to know that whatever happens with Robert, you'll always be family to us. As the one-year anniversary of the reunion approached, I found myself surprisingly calm. The sharp edges of betrayal had dulled to a manageable ache, present but no longer debilitating. My new life had taken shape around me, a career with fresh purpose, a home that reflected only my tastes, friendships deepened by authenticity rather than social convenience. On the actual anniversary, I took a personal day and drove alone to Lake Michigan. The spring air carried a hint of warmth as I walked along the shoreline, watching waves crash against the sand. I found a quiet spot on a dune and retrieved a small box from my bag. Inside was the letter I had written to Robert the night before the reunion, words never delivered but preserved as a time capsule of raw emotion. I reread it once, acknowledging the pain and anger of that moment without being consumed by it. Then I tore it into tiny pieces, letting the wind carry them out over the water, watching as they disappeared into the vastness of the lake. My phone buzzed with a notification. a reminder about tomorrow's curriculum planning meeting. Real life, my new life, waiting for me beyond this moment of ceremonial closure. I lingered a while longer, savoring the sense of completion before finally turning back toward the parking lot. As I reached my car, my phone rang, an unknown Chicago number. My heart skipped, then steadied as I silenced the call without answering. Whatever Robert might want to say a year later held no interest for me. There was nothing left to discuss, no loose ends requiring resolution. I sent a quick text to Emily, "Still on for dinner tonight?" "Absolutely," came her immediate reply. "The girls are excited to see their favorite aunt." I smiled, sliding behind the wheel. The rearview mirror offered a glimpse of the lake behind me, beautiful but receding as I drove forward. 5 years of marriage had taught me much about love, commitment, and betrayal. But this year of rebuilding had taught me something far more valuable: the quiet strength of choosing myself, day after day, without apology or compromise. The road ahead curved through spring-green forests, leading away from the water and toward the city, toward dinner with Emily's daughters, toward next week's curriculum presentation, toward 1,000 small moments that would form the mosaic of my continuing story. Whatever chapter came next would be written entirely in my own hand, shaped by my own choices, independent of the shadow Robert had once cast across my life. I turned up the radio, opened the windows to the spring air, and drove on, not toward any specific destination but simply forward. On our honeymoon, my husband handed me divorce papers and said, "I only married you because I bet $10,000 with my friends." He laughed as he walked away, thinking he'd never see me again. But exactly a year later, he fell to his knees when he saw me walk into the room as, "I only married you because I bet $10,000 with my friends." Logan Reynolds' words echoed through our luxury honeymoon suite in Maldives, his laughter cutting deeper than the divorce papers he'd casually tossed onto our untouched bed. Standing there in my white silk robe, I watched my husband of exactly 7 days walk away, leaving me with nothing but a cruel truth and an unexpected strength beginning to burn inside me. Little did he know that this moment in Blackwood Global Enterprises CFO Cameron Blake's luxury resort would set in motion a chain of events that would bring him to his knees exactly 1 year later. Before we dive deeper into this journey, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for joining me on this incredible ride. If these stories of resilience and unexpected twists are resonating with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and helps us grow this amazing community. Now let's dive in. Perhaps if I'd known how this fairy tale would end, I might have seen the signs that first morning at Blackwood Global Enterprises. Now, as I stand in this honeymoon suite, my world shattering around me, my mind can't help but drift back to where it all began exactly 1 year ago. The memory feels like watching a movie where you already know the ending, yet you're powerless to warn the main character of what's to come. Let me take you back to that autumn morning when an ambitious young analyst stepped into a world of corporate politics, hidden agendas, and a bet that would change everything. The glossy marble lobby of Blackwood Global Enterprises gleamed under crystal chandeliers as I clutched my leather portfolio, heart racing with first-day jitters. The security guard's warm smile did little to calm my nerves as he handed over my freshly minted employee badge. "Amber Mitchell, financial analyst. 47th floor," he directed, pointing toward the executive elevators. "Mr. Blake's team is expecting you." The elevator ride felt endless, each floor bringing me closer to what I hoped would be the beginning of my dream career. I'd graduated top of my class, completed prestigious internships, and finally landed a position at one of the most competitive firms in the country. What I didn't know then was that this elevator would become the stage for countless moments that would reshape my entire life. Logan Reynolds was waiting when the doors opened, his crisp navy suit and confident smile making my breath catch. "Amber Mitchell?" He extended his hand. "I'm Logan, Senior VP of Strategic Planning. Cameron asked me to show you around." Cameron Blake's name carried weight throughout the financial world. As CFO of Blackwood, his reputation for brilliant strategy and impeccable ethics had transformed the company. I'd researched him extensively before my interviews, but nothing had prepared me for the commanding presence that greeted us in the conference room. "Welcome to Blackwood, Ms. Mitchell." Cameron's deep voice resonated with genuine warmth. "Logan speaks highly of your credentials. I trust you'll find our team both challenging and supportive." Those first weeks passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and late nights poring over spreadsheets. Logan frequently stopped by my desk, offering guidance and coffee when my eyes grew tired. His mentorship seemed natural, professional, until the evening everything shifted. "You've got real potential, Amber," he said one night as we worked on quarterly projections. "Not everyone picks up our systems this quickly." The soft lighting cast shadows across his features, making him appear almost vulnerable. "Would you like to grab dinner? To celebrate your first month?" I should have noticed how Cameron's expression tightened whenever he saw Logan and me together. Should have registered the knowing looks exchanged between Logan and his executive friends. But I was enchanted by Logan's attention, his seemingly genuine interest in my ideas and ambitions. Our office romance bloomed amid budget meetings and strategy sessions. Stolen glances across conference tables, fingers brushing as we exchanged documents, lunch breaks that stretched slightly too long. The entire office buzzed with whispers about the rising star VP and the promising new analyst. Cameron remained professional but distant, his piercing gaze often lingering on our interactions. In retrospect, perhaps he saw what I was too blinded by emotion to recognize. The subtle smirks Logan shared with his friends, the way he showcased our relationship in front of certain executives, the calculated nature of his advances. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," Logan would say, making my heart soar. He painted pictures of our future shared success, partnership in both life and career. When he proposed 6 months later in front of the entire executive team, tears of joy blurred my vision as Cameron stood silently in the background. The engagement transformed our workplace dynamic. Suddenly, I wasn't just the talented analyst anymore. I was Logan Reynolds' fiancé. Doors opened, invitations to executive events multiplied, and my projects received unprecedented attention. I attributed it all to Logan's influence and support, never suspecting the cruel truth lurking beneath the surface. As I sit here now, remembering those early days at Blackwood, the signs seem painfully obvious. The way Logan's friends watched our relationship unfold with barely concealed amusement. The concerned glances Cameron sent my way. The too perfect fairy tale that would shatter into 1,000 pieces on a pristine Maldivian beach, transforming my romantic dream into an elaborate nightmare orchestrated for a mere $10,000. But that was just the beginning. Little did Logan know that the company that witnessed our romance would become the stage for something far more powerful than his petty bet, a revenge served not with anger, but with success beyond his wildest imagination. The spring air carried the scent of blooming roses as Blackwood Global Enterprises elite gathered at the Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom. Every detail of our wedding day had been meticulously planned, from the crystal chandeliers draped with white orchids to the string quartet playing softly in the corner. Logan had insisted on sparing no expense, though I'd preferred something more intimate. "It's not every day a senior VP marries his protégé," he'd said with that charismatic smile that made everyone forget their reservations. Now, standing before the ornate floor-length mirror in the bridal suite, I smoothed my hands over the custom-designed gown that cost more than my first year's salary. My reflection showed a woman transformed, no longer just the ambitious analyst, but a bride about to marry into Blackwood's inner circle. The makeup artist had created a masterpiece, hiding the shadows under my eyes from countless late nights finalizing merger documents. Those documents, ironically, would later prove crucial to my understanding of the company's power structure. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. "Ms. Mitchell?" Cameron Blake stood in the doorway, his usual commanding presence softened by what appeared to be genuine concern. "May I have a moment?" He approached with measured steps, holding a small blue box. "A wedding gift," he explained, though perhaps not what you might expect. Inside lay an elegant silver key to a private office on the executive floor. "You've earned it through your own merit, regardless of today's celebrations." Something in his tone made me pause, but before I could analyze it further, my bridesmaids burst in with champagne and excitement. Cameron slipped away, his gift tucked safely in my clutch, where it would remain forgotten until that fateful day in the Maldives. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotions and perfectly choreographed moments. Logan's vows rang with sincerity that would later mock me in my darkest hours. "You're not just my partner in life," he declared before the assembled corporate aristocracy, "but my greatest investment." The crowd sighed appreciatively, missing the calculated gleam in his eyes. During the reception, I noticed Cameron deep in conversation with Logan's circle of executive friends. Their usual boisterous laughter seemed muted, faces serious until they spotted me watching. The champagne flowed freely, toasts becoming increasingly elaborate as the evening progressed. To the perfect corporate merger, one board member declared, drawing polite laughter. Logan's best man, David from marketing, gave a speech filled with inside jokes about office romance and strategic partnerships. Each word would later take on new, bitter meaning. The wedding gift table groaned under elaborate packages from the corporate elite, rare art pieces, exotic vacation vouchers, and enough crystal to fill a showroom. But it was Cameron's simple key that should have commanded my attention. Instead, I was distracted by Logan's constant parading of me before influential guests. My brilliant bride, he'd introduce me hand-possessively at my waist. Did you know she increased department efficiency by 30% in her first quarter? Each introduction felt less like pride and more like a sales pitch, though I couldn't understand why until much later. As the evening drew to a close, Logan's friends gathered for one final toast. Their glasses clinked with an intensity that seemed out of place for a wedding celebration. To success, they chorused, exchanging knowing looks that I mistook for simple male camaraderie. We departed amid a shower of rose petals, bound for the Maldives in Logan's company's private jet. The cabin crew treated us with exceptional courtesy, though I caught one flight attendant giving me a strangely sympathetic glance. Perhaps she'd witnessed similar scenes before. Or maybe she simply saw what I was still blind to, a carefully orchestrated performance reaching its final act. As the city lights faded below us, I curled contentedly against my new husband's shoulder, his laptop screen reflecting yet another work email. Just finalizing some details for our return, he assured me, typing rapidly. Those details, I would soon learn, had nothing to do with work and everything to do with a bet that would shatter my world in paradise. The wedding ring felt heavy on my finger, its diamonds catching the cabin's dim light. In just 7 days, it would become a symbol not of love, but of the most expensive lesson I'd ever learn about trust, ambition, and the true nature of corporate alliances. The Maldivian resort spread before us like a postcard come to life, crystalline waters, pristine white beaches, and our private villa perched over the tranquil lagoon. Cameron Blake's luxury property had exceeded every expectation, though I found it curious that Logan had chosen his CFO's resort for our honeymoon. The staff welcomed us with fresh coconuts and knowing smiles, leading us to the most exclusive overwater villa. "Welcome to paradise, Mrs. Reynolds," Logan announced as we entered the spectacular suite. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed an endless horizon where turquoise waters met azure skies. I was too entranced by the view to notice him checking his phone repeatedly, responding to messages with unusual urgency. Our first day passed in a blur of luxury spa treatments and gourmet meals, though Logan seemed distracted, constantly excusing himself for urgent business calls. That evening, as I stood on our private deck watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, he finally emerged from another lengthy phone conversation, his expression unreadable. "Amber," he called, his voice carrying an unfamiliar edge. "We need to talk." I turned, still smiling, only to find him holding a manila envelope. The sunset's warm glow suddenly felt cold against my skin. "What's that?" "You're smart, Amber. It's one of the things that made you perfect for this." He approached, his designer shoes clicking against the hardwood deck. "Perfect for the bet, I mean." "Bet." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to comprehend. Logan's laugh cut through the paradise ambience like a blade through silk. $10,000. That's what they wagered I couldn't get you to marry me within a year. He tossed the envelope onto the outdoor dining table. "Divorce papers. Already prepared." The world tilted sideways as reality crashed through my fairy tale. "Bet on marrying me? Don't take it personally, sweetheart. You were the perfect target, brilliant enough to be impressive, naive enough to be believable." The board members loved watching our little romance unfold. His smile turned cruel. "Though I must admit you made it almost too easy." My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope, the legal documents inside bearing his signature, dated weeks before our wedding. "All of it was a lie?" "Not all of it. You really are talented at your job. That's what made it interesting," the ambitious analyst who caught the VP's eye. "Classic corporate fairy tale." He loosened his tie, looking relieved. "The guys didn't think I could pull it off, especially with Cameron watching so closely." But here we are. The mention of Cameron's name triggered a memory. The key he'd given me, his concerned glances, the serious conversations with Logan's friends. He'd known, or at least suspected, yet couldn't warn me without proof. $10,000, I whispered, my voice steady despite the tremors racking my body. That's what my heart was worth. Look at it this way, you got a fantastic wedding, a luxury honeymoon, and valuable networking opportunities. Some would call that a fair trade. He checked his watch casually. My flight leaves in 3 hours. You can stay here for the week. Consider it a parting gift. The resort staff already knows our marriage was just for show. The humiliation burned deeper than any physical pain. Every kiss, every promise, every shared moment had been carefully choreographed for an audience of wealthy executives betting on my heart like a horse at the races. Why tell me here? Why not wait until we returned? Dramatic flair, he shrugged. Plus, it's harder for you to cause a scene in paradise. Corporate image to maintain, you understand? As he walked away, designer suitcase rolling behind him, his final words drifted back across the deck. See you at the office, Amber. Do try to keep things professional. I stood there long after the sun had set, the divorce papers clutched in my hands, watching the stars emerge over what should have been my honeymoon paradise. Something shifted inside me as the shock gave way to clarity. They'd all watched, placed their bets, waited for the punchline. Now they'd expect me to crumble, resign, disappear. Instead, I picked up my phone and typed a simple message to Cameron Blake. The key you gave me, is that office still available? His response came immediately, always was. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planned, it's earned. I smiled into the darkness, a plan already forming. Logan and his friends had gambled with the wrong woman's heart, and soon they'd learn that some bets come with consequences they never calculated. The familiar ding of Blackwood Global Enterprises' elevator no longer brought butterflies to my stomach. 1 week after the Maldives revelation, I stepped onto the 47th floor wearing armor disguised as a designer suit, a gift to myself using the honeymoon fund Logan had so generously left behind. Welcome back, Ms. Mitchell, Cameron's executive assistant greeted me with a knowing smile, leading me past my old desk toward the private office his key had promised. The brass nameplate already mounted on the door read Amber Mitchell, Senior Financial Strategist. My promotion had been processed during my absence, planned long before Logan's dramatic exit from paradise. The corner office suits you, Cameron's voice came from behind me. I trust you're ready to dive into the Morrison merger? His tone carried no pity, just professional respect, exactly what I needed. The whispers started before I'd even settled into my new leather chair. They rippled through the office like waves across that Maldivian lagoon I'd left behind. Logan's friends huddled by the water cooler, their smirks fading when they realized I wasn't running away in tears. The quarterly projections are on your desk, I announced, striding into the morning meeting with confidence that surprised even me. Logan sat at his usual place, his momentary shock quickly masked by that practiced corporate smile. You'll notice I've included alternative strategies for the Asian market expansion. Cameron leaned forward, genuinely interested. Walk us through your analysis, Ms. Mitchell. For the next 30 minutes, I commanded the room's attention with facts, figures, and innovative solutions to problems they hadn't even anticipated. Logan shifted uncomfortably as his colleagues nodded with growing approval. The $10,000 he'd won seemed insignificant compared to the millions my strategy could save the company. Impressive work, one board member commented. Hard to believe you found time for this during your abbreviated honeymoon. Focus is an excellent coping mechanism, I replied smoothly, gathering my presentations. Though not as effective as competence. The subtle dig made Logan's jaw clench. He knew better than anyone how capable I truly was. Lunch hours became my sanctuary in the executive lounge, where Cameron often joined me to discuss business strategies. His guidance was invaluable, though he never mentioned the bet or its aftermath unless I brought it up first. They expected you to resign, he remarked one afternoon, watching Logan and his friends at their usual table. Your resilience has them worried. They should be, I responded, reviewing acquisition reports. I didn't spend 5 years earning my MBA to let a childish bet derail my career. The afternoon sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as I worked late into the evening, long after Logan and his conspirators had left. My new office became a testament to professional dedication, walls adorned with industry awards and market analysis rather than the personal photos that once cluttered my old desk. "You're different," my assistant observed one evening, delivering another round of coffee. "Stronger." "Not different," I corrected, signing off on another successful project. "Just no longer distracted by fairy tales." The weeks marched forward, each day adding another brick to the foundation of my recovery. Logan's attempts to undermine my confidence fell flat against the shield of my growing success. His snide comments in meetings were met with data-driven rebuttals that left him scrambling. "The board is impressed with your performance," Cameron mentioned casually one evening. "Particularly your handling of the Morrison negotiations." I smiled, remembering Logan's frustrated expression when his proposed strategy had been overshadowed by my superior analysis. Success is the best answer to doubters. As the sun set over the city skyline, I stood at my office window, fingering the key Cameron had given me on my wedding day. The woman reflected in the glass wasn't a victim of a cruel bet, she was a phoenix rising from the ashes of betrayal, her wings made of spreadsheets and strategic planning rather than broken promises. My phone buzzed with a message from the board. My proposal for restructuring the Asian division had been unanimously approved, with one notable abstention from a certain senior VP who was quickly losing his golden boy status. Paradise Lost had become Paradise Redirected, and as I watched Logan's office light flick off for the day, I knew this was just the beginning of my response to his $10,000 gamble. 3 months after the honeymoon incident, Blackwood Global Enterprises buzzed with a different kind of energy. My successful restructuring of the Asian division had opened doors previously barred by old corporate hierarchies. The quarterly board meeting approached, and this time I wasn't just presenting, I was leading the strategic planning session. The Singapore numbers exceeded projections by 30%, I announced, standing confidently at the head of the boardroom. Behind me, vibrant graphs displayed the success of my initiatives. Our new approach to regional partnerships has created unprecedented growth opportunities. Logan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual swagger diminished by the undeniable success of the strategy he'd originally opposed. Cameron sat at the opposite end of the table, his slight smile conveying silent approval as I fielded questions from impressed board members. "Remarkable turnaround, Ms. Mitchell," the board chairman commented. "Perhaps you'd be interested in heading our new International Development Committee?" I caught Logan's sharp intake of breath. He'd been angling for that position for months. "I'd be honored, sir," I responded, maintaining professional composure despite the sweet satisfaction coursing through my veins. After the meeting, Cameron invited me to join him for coffee in his private office. The city skyline provided a stunning backdrop as he poured 2 cups from his personal espresso machine. "You've exceeded every expectation," he remarked, handing me a steaming cup. "Though I suspect that's becoming a habit for you." "Excellence is the best response to doubt," I replied, noting how his eyes crinkled with appreciation at the sentiment. Our professional relationship had evolved into a genuine mentorship. Cameron's guidance went beyond mere business strategy. He taught me the intricate dance of corporate politics, the art of turning adversaries into allies, and the importance of patience in pursuing long-term goals. The transformation wasn't limited to my career. I'd invested in myself, upgrading my wardrobe to project the image of success I was rapidly becoming. The timid analyst who'd once sought Logan's approval had been replaced by a confident executive who commanded respect through competence rather than connections. "The Morrison Group is impressed with your handling of their portfolio," Cameron mentioned during one of our strategy sessions. "They've requested you personally for their upcoming expansion project." The irony wasn't lost on me. The Morrison account had been Logan's pride and joy, his ticket to the executive committee. Now it was slipping through his fingers along with his reputation for being indispensable. Late nights at the office became opportunities for innovation rather than escape. I built a team of talented analysts who shared my vision for data-driven decision-making. Together, we revolutionized the company's approach to international markets, earning recognition from industry leaders and financial publications. "Your recent success has caught the attention of our competitors," Cameron warned one evening, closing the door to my office. "Several firms have inquired about your availability." I smiled, organizing reports on my desk. "My loyalty lies with those who recognize true potential, not those who mistake it for a betting opportunity." His expression softened momentarily before returning to its professional mask. The annual leadership retreat is next month. As head of international development, your presence is expected. The retreat where Logan had first proposed, playing to an audience of betting spectators. This year I'd return not as someone's fiancé, but as a rising star in my own right. As darkness fell over the city, I stood in my corner office, watching employees filter out for the day. Logan's light still burned in his increasingly isolated workspace. His circle of friends had dwindled as my influence grew. Success attracted allies more effectively than shared secrets. My phone buzzed with another message from a headhunter, offering opportunities that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. I declined politely, knowing my greatest victory would come from succeeding exactly where they'd expected me to fail. Ready for tomorrow's presentation? Cameron asked, pausing by my door on his way out. Always, I replied, gathering my materials. Though I suspect Logan's team might not be prepared for the changes I'm proposing. Cameron's subtle smile spoke volumes. Some bets, he said quietly, pay off in unexpected ways. Walking to my car that evening, I caught my reflection in the lobby's marble walls, confident, composed, and completely transformed from the woman who'd once dreamed of a fairy tale romance. The real fairy tale, it seemed, was writing itself in boardrooms and balance sheets, with success as the sweetest revenge of all. The annual leadership retreat at Lake Tahoe painted a vastly different picture from the previous year. Instead of clinging to Logan's arm as his trophy fiancé, I commanded attention through my innovative presentations and market insights. The lakeside resort, with its sprawling grounds and elegant conference facilities, provided the perfect backdrop for this new chapter. Cameron and I found ourselves sharing quiet moments between sessions, our conversations flowing naturally from business strategy to personal philosophies. During a sunset walk along the private beach, he paused to skip stones across the calm water. "You've transformed the company's international portfolio," he remarked, watching ripples spread across the lake. "But more impressively, you've transformed yourself. Sometimes we need to be broken to discover our true strength," I replied, selecting a smooth stone of my own. It skipped 5 times before sinking beneath the golden surface. Our dynamic had shifted subtly over the months. The mentorship that began as professional guidance had evolved into something deeper, built on mutual respect and understanding. Cameron never pushed, never rushed, allowing trust to rebuild at its own pace. "Join me for dinner?" he asked one evening, after a particularly successful strategy session. The resort's restaurant has an excellent view of the sunset. Logan watched from across the lobby as Cameron held the restaurant door for me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. The $10,000 bet that was supposed to break me had instead led me to someone who saw my true worth. Over candlelight and fine wine, Cameron shared stories of his own early career struggles, revealing vulnerabilities beneath his polished exterior. "I recognized something in you from the beginning," he admitted. "A resilience that couldn't be bought or broken. Is that why you gave me the office key at the wedding? I knew you'd need a sanctuary, not a shoulder to cry on." His honesty was refreshing after Logan's elaborate deceptions. "Though I never imagined you'd transform that sanctuary into a command center for corporate revolution." Weeks after the retreat, our working dinners became more frequent, each conversation revealing new layers of connection. Cameron's genuine interest in my ideas and unwavering support of my ambitions stood in stark contrast to Logan's superficial charm. "The board is considering several changes to senior management," Cameron mentioned during one such dinner. "Your name features prominently in those discussions." I smiled, remembering the nervous analyst who'd once thought marriage to a VP was her path to success. Life has a way of exceeding our original aspirations. The gossip mill churned with speculation about our growing closeness, but this time I didn't care. What was building between Cameron and me felt real, substantial, everything my relationship with Logan had pretended to be. During a late-night strategy session in his office, Cameron finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I've watched you rebuild yourself from the ashes of betrayal," he said softly. "And in doing so, you've built something I never expected to find in the corporate world: genuine connection." The city lights twinkled below as he stepped closer, his presence both comforting and exhilarating. "The question is," he continued, "are you ready to trust again?" Looking into his eyes, I saw no trace of calculation or hidden agendas. With the right person, I replied. Trust isn't a risk, it's an investment. His smile held promises that required no verbal guarantees. As he leaned in to kiss me, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't plotting payback. It's finding authentic happiness while your adversaries watch from the sidelines. The next morning, walking into the office together, we made no attempt to hide our connection. Logan's face twisted with recognition as he pieced together the ultimate irony. His cruel bet had led me straight into the arms of his boss, a man whose net worth made $10,000 look like pocket change. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about finding someone who valued me for exactly who I was, who had seen my potential even when I was blind to it myself. Cameron's love wasn't a bet or a game. It was the unexpected prize I'd won by refusing to let betrayal define me. Our wedding was everything my first wasn't: intimate, genuine, and completely free of corporate politics. Cameron and I exchanged vows in his private garden estate, surrounded by blooming cherry blossoms and only our closest friends. No betting pools, no hidden agendas, just pure, uncomplicated love. Ready to make your grand entrance? Cameron squeezed my hand as we stood in the elevator of Blackwood Global Enterprises the following Monday. The diamond on my finger caught the morning light, but this time it symbolized something real. The doors opened to reveal the familiar 47th floor, though everything felt different now. Employees stopped mid-conversation, their eyes widening as they processed the sight of their CFO hand in hand with the woman who'd once been the subject of their gossip. "Good morning, Mrs. Blake," Cameron's executive assistant beamed, handing me a stack of congratulatory messages. The nameplate on my office door had already been updated. Amber Blake, Executive Vice President of International Operations. Logan's arrival coincided perfectly with our morning walk to the conference room. He froze mid-stride, coffee cup halfway to his lips, as reality crashed over him in waves. His ex-wife, the target of his cruel bet, was now not only his superior but also married to the company's CFO. "The quarterly reports, Logan?" I asked pleasantly, watching him struggle to maintain composure. "I believe they were due on my desk this morning." Yes, of course," he stammered, suddenly looking very small in his once prestigious corner office. "I'll have them to you within the hour, Mrs. Blake." The morning meeting was a masterpiece of corporate karma. Cameron and I sat side by side at the head of the table, our matching wedding bands gleaming under the boardroom lights. Logan's former allies, the same executives who'd participated in his betting game, now courted my favor with transparent enthusiasm. "The Asian expansion has exceeded all projections," I announced, sharing a knowing look with my husband. "Thanks to our new strategic partnerships, we're looking at a record-breaking quarter." The board members nodded approvingly. The same men who'd once watched Logan humiliate me now hung on my every word. Success, it seemed, was the most elegant form of retribution. During lunch, Cameron surprised me with a champagne toast in the executive lounge. "To my brilliant wife," he raised his glass, who turned a $10,000 bet into a multi-million-dollar success story. Logan, dining alone at his usual table, couldn't help but overhear. The irony was exquisite. His attempt to break me had instead elevated me far beyond his reach. Now he answered to me, submitted reports for my approval, and watched daily as I lived the fairy tale he'd only pretended to offer. The Morrison Group called. My assistant interrupted our lunch. "They're requesting a personal meeting with both you and Mr. Blake regarding the expansion project." "Schedule it for tomorrow," I replied, catching Logan's pained expression. The Morrison account, his former crown jewel, now reported directly to me. As the day drew to a close, Cameron and I stood in his office, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold. "Having any regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Only that I didn't see you sooner," I smiled, leaning back against him. "Though sometimes the longest routes lead to the best destinations." Through the glass walls I could see Logan working late, probably trying to salvage what remained of his reputation. The $10,000 he'd won now seemed like pocket change compared to what he'd lost: his status, his influence, and most importantly, a woman who'd transformed betrayal into triumph. "Ready to head home?" Cameron asked, gathering his things. "Home, our shared mansion in the hills. Another upgrade from the apartment I'd once shared with Logan." "Actually," I smiled, straightening my designer suit, "I have one last meeting. The board is reviewing senior management positions, and I have some recommendations to discuss." Logan's light was still on as we passed his office. He looked up just in time to see Cameron kiss me goodbye, a final reminder that some bets come with consequences far beyond their initial stakes. The following weeks at Blackwood Global Enterprises became a masterclass in poetic justice. Each morning, Logan would arrive to find his world slightly smaller, his influence incrementally diminished. Today was no different as he sat through another executive meeting, watching his former friends hang on my every word. "The Morrison Group has agreed to expand our partnership," I announced, sharing a subtle smile with Cameron. "They've committed to a 5-year exclusive contract, with potential for expansion into emerging markets." Logan's face paled. He'd spent 3 years cultivating that relationship, only to watch it flourish under my leadership. His coffee cup trembled slightly as he took a sip, avoiding eye contact with his former betting companions who now sought my mentorship instead of his companionship. "Excellent work, Mrs. Blake," the board chairman beamed. "Perhaps you could walk us through your strategy for the European division next?" Cameron sat back, pride evident in his expression as I commanded the room. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman they'd once dismissed as a naive betting prize was now orchestrating billion-dollar deals with effortless grace. During lunch breaks, Logan would sit alone in the executive lounge, watching as Cameron and I shared intimate conversations over gourmet meals. The same space where he'd once bragged about his successful bet had become a daily reminder of everything he'd lost. "The quarterly performance reviews are due," my assistant reminded me. "Including Mr. Reynolds' department." I nodded, catching Logan's reflection in the glass walls as he hurried past. "Schedule them for tomorrow. I believe Mr. Reynolds could benefit from some constructive feedback." The review session was professional yet pointed. Logan squirmed in his chair as I outlined his department's declining performance metrics. "Your team seems to lack direction," I observed, sliding the reports across my desk. "Perhaps you're finding it challenging to maintain focus?" I've been implementing new strategies," he stammered, his confident facade cracking. "If you just give me more time. Time is a luxury earned through results, Mr. Reynolds," I interrupted smoothly. Something I learned during my own accelerated career development. Later that afternoon, Cameron found me reviewing acquisition proposals in my office. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he asked, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Enjoying what?" I replied innocently, watching Logan through the glass walls as he struggled through another failed presentation. "Simply maintaining professional standards." The day's crowning moment came during the final budget meeting. Logan's proposal for his department's expansion was met with skeptical looks from the board members, the same men who'd once backed his every venture. "Perhaps," I suggested, perfectly poised, "we should consider reallocating those resources to more promising initiatives." The unanimous nods around the table confirmed what Logan already knew: his glory days were over. As evening approached, I caught him staring at old photos on his phone, images from our wedding day, now tainted by the truth of his deception. The $10,000 he'd won probably felt worthless compared to watching his ex-wife become everything he'd pretended to believe in. "Ready for dinner?" Cameron appeared at my door, car keys in hand. Our evening plans, a reservation at the city's most exclusive restaurant, were no secret. Another reminder of the lifestyle Logan had gambled away. "Just finishing up," I smiled, signing the last document on my desk, a performance improvement plan for Logan's department. His signature line at the bottom might as well have been a surrender document. Walking past his office, arm in arm with Cameron, I paused briefly. "Don't forget the Morrison presentation tomorrow, Mr. Reynolds. 8 a.m. sharp." The defeated look in his eyes was worth more than any betting pool. In the elevator, Cameron pulled me close. "You're quite the strategist, Mrs. Blake." "I learned from the best," I replied, watching our reflection in the polished doors. "Sometimes the most satisfying victories are the ones you don't have to plan. They simply unfold naturally." The night city sparkled below, a fitting backdrop to our success story. Meanwhile, Logan's office light burned late, as it did most evenings now, a solitary reminder that some bets carry consequences far beyond their original stakes. The city lights twinkled below as Cameron and I clinked glasses in our penthouse suite at the Grand Plaza, the same hotel where I'd once celebrated my ill-fated first wedding. Tonight, however, we were toasting something far more substantial: Blackwood Global Enterprises' most successful quarter in company history. To my brilliant wife, Cameron smiled, his eyes reflecting the same genuine admiration I'd come to treasure. Who turned adversity into empire. Our home life had blossomed into something I'd never experienced with Logan, genuine partnership. Each morning began with shared coffee and market reports, our conversations flowing effortlessly between personal dreams and professional strategies. The Asian markets are showing remarkable growth, I noted, reviewing the morning briefings in our home office. The Singapore merger exceeded projections by 40%. Cameron nodded, pride evident in his expression. The board's quarterly review arrived. They're particularly impressed with your leadership of the international division. The transformation extended beyond the boardroom. Our weekends were filled with charity galas, art exhibitions, and quiet moments that felt more valuable than any corporate victory. The society pages that had once documented my fairy tale wedding to Logan now chronicled the power couple reshaping the business landscape. Mrs. Blake, your 9 a.m. with the European investors is confirmed, my assistant reported as we arrived at the office. And Mr. Reynolds submitted his department's revised budget proposals. I smiled, remembering how Logan had once commanded these halls. Now his proposals landed in my inbox, each one a reminder of how thoroughly our positions had reversed. The morning meeting showcased the stark contrast between past and present. While Logan hunched over his laptop in the corner, I led the executive team through our global expansion strategy. His former allies now sought my approval, their expensive suits and practiced smiles unable to mask their shifted allegiances. The Morrison Group CEO called personally, Cameron mentioned during our lunch break. He's impressed with your vision for the Pacific Rim markets. The executive lounge buzzed with activity as we shared a quiet meal. Logan sat alone at his usual table, picking at his food while watching us with barely concealed regret. The $10,000 he'd won in his cruel bet probably felt like loose change compared to the empire I'd built from the ashes of his betrayal. The annual charity gala is next month, I reminded Cameron as we reviewed our calendar. The committee requested we serve as honorary chairs. The same social circle that had witnessed my humiliation would now watch as we took center stage, the corporate power couple whose success story had become legend in business circles. Later that afternoon, I caught Logan staring at the magazine cover framed in my office. Business Leader of the Year. Amber Blake revolutionizes global markets. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. His attempt to break me had instead unleashed my full potential. The New York expansion needs a strong leader, Cameron mused during our evening strategy session. Someone who understands our vision for growth. I smiled, already knowing Logan would apply for the position, unaware that his fate had been decided weeks ago. I believe we already have the perfect candidate in mind. Our driver navigated through evening traffic as we headed home, the city skyline a glittering testament to possibilities. In the back seat, I reviewed the next day's agenda while Cameron fielded calls from international partners. Sometimes, he said after ending his last call, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting everything. Looking at my husband, I realized he was right. The fairy tale ending Logan had pretended to offer paled in comparison to the real-life success story I'd written for myself. My happiness wasn't built on his downfall but on my own rise to power. The evening news played silently on our home theater screen, showing coverage of Blackwood's latest market triumph. Somewhere in the city, Logan was probably watching the same broadcast, remembering the day he'd thought a $10,000 bet would define my worth. Little did he know he'd bet against the wrong woman, and lost everything that mattered in the process. Exactly 1 year after Logan had tossed those divorce papers onto our honeymoon bed, I stood at the podium in Blackwood Global Enterprises Grand Conference Center. The annual shareholders meeting had drawn record attendance, but one face in the crowd commanded my attention, Logan's ashen expression as I prepared to deliver news that would reshape the company forever. Distinguished shareholders, I began, Cameron's supportive presence beside me. I'm pleased to announce not only our most profitable year to date but also a strategic restructuring that will propel us into a new era of global dominance. The room hung on every word as I outlined our vision for the future. Logan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, likely remembering how he'd once dismissed my strategic insights as naive ambition. Now those same insights had transformed Blackwood into a market leader. As part of our reorganization, I continued, sharing a knowing glance with Cameron, we'll be consolidating our domestic operations. Several departments will be streamlined for maximum efficiency. Logan's department, of course, topped the consolidation list. His position would be absorbed into the international division, my division. The $10,000 he'd won in his cruel bet wouldn't begin to cover the salary difference between his current role and his new diminished position. Additionally, Cameron stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. The board has unanimously approved a new executive structure. I'm proud to announce that Amber Blake will be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer, while I'll transition to Executive Chairman. The applause thundered through the room as Logan's face crumpled. Not only had his ex-wife survived his betrayal, but she'd also climbed to the very top of the corporate ladder he'd once thought he owned. After the meeting, well-wishers flooded our path to the executive suite. Quite a journey from that honeymoon suite in the Maldives, I remarked to Cameron as we watched Logan clear out his corner office. Some people bet on games, Cameron replied, squeezing my hand. Others bet on themselves. The afternoon brought a steady stream of executives seeking favor with the new CEO. The same men who'd once participated in Logan's betting pool now presented ambitious proposals and enthusiastic congratulations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "Your new office is ready, Mrs. Blake," my assistant announced. The CEO's suite, significantly larger than the sanctuary Cameron had given me a year ago, offered a panoramic view of the city I'd conquered. As I settled behind the massive desk, Logan appeared in the doorway, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "Congratulations," he managed, his voice barely steady. "I suppose I should thank you for not terminating my position entirely." "Consider it a reminder," I replied smoothly, "that some investments yield unexpected returns." The day concluded with a private celebration at our penthouse. As Cameron and I toasted to the future, I couldn't help but reflect on the past year's perfect symmetry. "Did you ever imagine," I asked, "when you gave me that office key at my first wedding, that we'd end up here?" "I knew you were extraordinary," he smiled, "but you've exceeded even my highest expectations." The evening news highlighted Blackwood's historic announcement, the youngest female CEO in the company's history, orchestrating its most successful year ever. Somewhere in his downsized apartment, Logan would be watching, remembering the moment he'd thought $10,000 was worth more than my heart. As the city lights twinkled below, I curled into Cameron's embrace, finally feeling complete. My revenge hadn't come from destroying Logan, but from building something far greater than he could have imagined. His bet had been the catalyst for my transformation from naive bride to corporate powerhouse. "Happy anniversary," Cameron whispered, referring not to our wedding but to that fateful day in the Maldives when one door had closed and another had opened. "To living well," I replied, raising my glass to the future we'd built together, a future far more valuable than any bet could measure. 5 years after that fateful day in the Maldives, I stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Business School, delivering the commencement speech to eager graduates. My story had become a case study in their curriculum, the Blake method, turning setbacks into success. The irony wasn't lost on me as I spotted Logan's name in the footnotes, not as a business leader, but as a cautionary tale. "Success isn't about winning a single bet," I addressed the crowd, catching Cameron's proud smile from the front row. "It's about recognizing your true worth and refusing to let others define your value." Blackwood Global Enterprises had tripled in size under my leadership, expanding into markets Logan had once dismissed as unreachable. The Morrison Group, his former crown jewel, had become just one small part of our vast international portfolio. After the ceremony, a young graduate approached me, clutching her diploma. "Mrs. Blake, your story inspired me to leave a toxic relationship and pursue my MBA," she confided. "How did you find the strength to turn betrayal into triumph?" I smiled, remembering the frightened bride in that honeymoon suite. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as losses. The key is recognizing when life is offering you an upgrade. Back at Blackwood's headquarters, Logan's old office had been converted into an innovation hub, a space where young analysts could develop their potential without fear of becoming betting fodder. He'd transferred to our smallest regional office in Minneapolis, handling local accounts with a fraction of his former authority. "The annual corporate awards ceremony is next week," Cameron reminded me over lunch in our executive dining room. "They're presenting you with the Lifetime Achievement Award." At 40, I laughed, but we both knew the significance. The same business community that had once whispered about Logan's cruel bet now studied my leadership strategies in boardrooms worldwide. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of karma. Logan had been required to attend as a regional manager, sitting in the back while industry leaders celebrated my success. His $10,000 win had cost him millions in lost opportunities and advancement. Amber Blake didn't just transform Blackwood, the presenter announced. She revolutionized corporate leadership, proving that true success comes from integrity, resilience, and vision. Accepting the award, I caught Logan's eye in the audience. For once, he didn't look away. 5 years ago, someone bet that I could be bought for a price. I addressed the crowd. They didn't realize that some things, dignity, self-worth, ambition, are priceless. To anyone facing their own moments of doubt, remember, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting exceptional. The standing ovation drowned out any response Logan might have made. As camera flashes captured the moment, I saw him slip quietly toward the exit, a final retreat from the empire he'd accidentally helped create. Later that evening, Cameron and I celebrated in our penthouse garden, the same spot where we'd exchanged genuine vows 4 years earlier. "Did you ever thank Logan for making that bet?" he teased, pouring champagne. "Thank him." I laughed, watching the sunset paint the sky in victory colors. "I suppose I should. Without his cruelty, I might never have discovered my true potential. Or found you." The morning papers would carry the story of my award, adding another chapter to the legend that had begun with a honeymoon betrayal. But the real story wasn't in the headlines or the stock prices or even the corner office. It was in the quiet moments of genuine love with Cameron, in the mentoring sessions with young executives, in the knowledge that every decision I made came from a place of earned wisdom rather than borrowed status. Logan's bet had been meant to break me. Instead, it had rebuilt me into someone far stronger than the bride he'd abandoned in paradise. His $10,000 had bought him a front-row seat to my renaissance, a lifetime reminder that some women aren't just meant to survive, they're meant to thrive. As the city lights began to twinkle below, I raised my glass in a final toast. Not to revenge or success or even karma, but to the beautiful truth that sometimes life's cruelest moments lead us exactly where we're meant to be. After all, the best endings aren't about getting even. They're about getting everything.